Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna de Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube, and the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars: A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, the commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It is so good to see you. Welcome here to my home. Welcome here to my office. And welcome to Table Talk. This has been a discussion that has been a long time in coming. We are talking about the book of Genesis tonight, specifically the first two. Let me start over. The book of Genesis tonight, the first 3 chapters. And I'm here joined with Brianna de Silva. So welcome, Brianna.
Hello.
This is kind of an experiment. I was kind of thinking about kind of new directions to go with Table Talk and how we go from here. And one of those ideas is I've got several different major topics to discuss, and many of those are biblical topics. We could say that, hey, what we're trying to do here is we're going to have some topics, but we can bring on multiple people to discuss them. So we don't all just have to say that the story of Adam and Eve is tonight. There might be multiple evenings on the story of Adam and Eve from different perspectives. If there are people here who are watching and things like that. Yes. So that's just an idea. So that's what I'm thinking about right now. So welcome, everybody. We are here talking about the book of Genesis from mainly a literary perspective and how this goes, but who knows how we will go with here. But I'm sure we will talk about how this has influenced our thinking and our upbringing and all of that too, I'm sure. Yeah. Brianna, you want to introduce yourself?
If I have to, I'm kidding. I am Brianna de Silva. Most of you are not new, I'm sure, and you already know who I am. But if you don't, I am a writer and a director. I am. You can find me on YouTube. I have a couple of short films under my name, and I'm the author of City of Reckoning, which is a epic fantasy novel.
And she is also the director of The Cultist and co-writer, and we're releasing new material there. And I've seen people have been subscribing to The Cultist YouTube channel and all of that in the past few days, and that's fantastic. All right, we got Charlie with us. Good evening, Charlie. Good evening, and also Better with Bacon. Check out his new channel, Better with Bacon.
That's a pretty funny title, actually.
I love the name. All right. So our idea here was to start doing some biblical analysis, and hey, we might as well start from the very beginning. So
what better place to start
than the book of Genesis? And we were only thinking like the first 3 chapters here as a story, so it's easy to get into. We specifically got some specific reading material, which I was putting on the Discord server about and all of that. Brianna, you recommended this book right here, right?
Yes, which is what I have. This is a very so it's the new Oxford Annotated Bible. What is this? The 5th edition is especially good.
That's very important. 5th edition.
Yes, the 5th edition has the best notes from what I've heard. It's very good for people who are wanting to study the Bible from a literature and like scholarly perspective. So it's for that purpose. And the translation is it's the New Revised Standard Version, which is one of the ones that's considered pretty accurate. Yeah. One of the things that's interesting about this translation, I should mention, is that it I mean, there's a bunch of things that are interesting about it, but I think one of my favorite things that really distinguishes it is it tries to. There's like a weird thing that happens translating especially the old Hebrew into English when it comes to gendered terms. It's easier to have sort of gender neutral terms, like things that just mean person or people have, and a lot of older English translations of the Bible been translated into he, him, man, just because of a sort of a patriarchal bias in that translation. So this translation does try to compensate for that as much as it can and try to reflect things when it is actually specifically meant to be like all people and it's supposed to be gender neutral. It tries to reflect that as much as it can without sounding weird in English. And when it can't reflect it, the notes will explain, like, we had to word it this way so it doesn't sound weird in English. But yeah.
Well, okay, wait a minute. Let's talk about that for just a moment. We're talking about translations here because when we're doing some kind of analysis here. So this is the New Revised Standard Version. Let me look that up for a moment. Because there's commentary, there's scholarly commentary on it.
Yeah, the commentary comes from the fact that it's the Oxford Annotated. Right, that's the well, there's both. Some of the commentary in there is stuff that is for all New Revised Standard Versions, and then on top of that is the more scholarly, New Oxford Annotated Bible annotations and
commentary. Okay, so it says the New Revised Standard Version, which is what this is. I'm just looking at Wikipedia at the moment. It's published in 1989 by the National Council of Churches. It was created by an ecumenical committee of scholars comprising about 30 members.
Yes, and they vary. That's really important.
Biblical scholars.
Because there are among them. Go ahead.
Well, I say so. It just says was intended as a translation to serve as a devotional, liturgical, and scholarly needs to the broadest range of Christian religious adherents.
Yes, and I want to say there were non-Christian Jewish influences as well. I think there's Catholic and Protestant influence there. Like they tried to make it as broadly accurate as possible, that like these different people with different beliefs within the tradition are in agreement. And also this version too includes the Apocrypha. So that fits into that goal of making it as broadly, that's an easy word for me to say, apparently, ecumenical.
Medical,
say?
yeah.
Trying to make it as that as they can.
So, okay, this has the passage on the gendered language you were just talking about. It says in the preface to the New Revised Standard Version, Bruce Metzinger wrote to the committee that many of the churches have become sensitive to the danger of linguistic sexism arising from the inherent bias of the English language towards the masculine gender, a bias that in the case the Bible is often restricted or obscured the meaning of the original text. The Revised Standard Version observed the older convention of using masculine nouns in the gender-neutral sense. For example, using man meaning person or man instead of person. And in some cases, used a masculine word for the source language, used a neutral word. Okay, and so this was something that was changed. But that's the different one. Well, I guess one of the differences, I guess, between the Revised Standard Version, the New Revised Standard Version.
Maybe,
Okay.
maybe. I don't remember if that was. Yeah, that might be correct. I don't remember when.
Well,
that
it says
comes
the New Revised Standard Version, by contrast, adopted a policy of inclusiveness in gendered language.
Okay, so it sounds like that would be yes.
Okay, but so I mean, I suppose I don't know. I mean, we're getting right into it, but I mean, as far as but this is an important thing to talk about when you're talking about the study of the Bible. When you're picking up some kind of translation of what this means. And, you can definitely sit here and read things, and you'd be reading something online or in some kind of magazine article or, whatever scholarly document. And it says, okay, now the passage says this, X, Y, Z, whatever it says. But in the actual Aramaic or this Hebrew or whatever, and in this, they're using this word and that means this. And so it actually means this when we're talking about this. And if you interpret this according to the, 700 BC Aramaic, whatever, then it actually means this. Well, I don't speak ancient Aramaic, so I don't know. I can read that person. They can tell me, oh, no. Oh, you're reading the King James version. Oh, well, gee, trust me. If you were reading the original Aramaic, or if you had the original understanding of ancient Greek, then you would understand that X. Okay, well, I don't. I do not speak Aramaic. I do not speak.
Well, that's why someone who is studying it is trying to illuminate that, right?
Yeah, I know, right. But see, but you have to know, because that person, because I can't go and check them. I mean, if somebody just comes up to me and says, "Oh, no, trust me, I have studied."
Well, you're not supposed to just trust one person. It's that's
know this.
It's that's not of course how we should listen to it. It's like if there are lots of different scholars that all might have different worldviews and different perspectives, and they're all saying that, then okay, we can trust that's probably
then we
correct.
take that. Then we take
right.
that.
Right.
So okay, but my point was, okay, there's that, because I have no way of independently going and checking any of that.
Not that we need to independently check things all the time, but yes.
Well, I know, but if somebody's like, hey, this is what this means, and if you had actually read it in its original language and what it's meaning, you would have a completely different interpretation than what is this. Okay. But then I also wonder, how much does that matter?
Well, it depends on what your goal is. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, because the King James Bible has had a tremendous influence on Western civilization. And so if I'm studying the Bible and I'm studying what the impact of, this has been, the King James Bible, I don't feel like is an illegitimate thing to study. Because even if you say, oh, no, this is something that, and if you had just been back to this, you wouldn't understand. And the King James Bible is all around. What is your purpose? Right.
Yeah, the goal
what
is
the
important,
purpose?
Right?
Because clearly the translation of the King James Bible has had a tremendous influence on, because I'm coming at this from an atheistic perspective anyway. So I'm not really trying to get to what a God actually said, because I don't believe that actually happened. But if I'm looking at, okay, what is the influence on our society? What are these stories saying? Well, something like the King James translation has been very important on our society. And I wonder how much I need to go back and be like, oh, no, this word's wrong. Because I don't believe I'm going to get at something godly anyway by the time I'm done with that analysis anyway.
Well, yeah, again, it depends on your goal.
You see what I'm saying?
If your primary interest, which that's good to define, is in like the impact on Western Western civilization. That makes sense. For me, that's not my primary interest. My primary interest is in like, what are these original stories? Like, what were they originally meant to mean? Because I'm interested in like the mythology and like, what is the archetypes and what are the things that might still resonate today, especially if we go to that primary source, and like, where do those stories come from, and like what their influence was at the time they were written. That's kind of like what is most interesting to me. So I think that's good that we might have two different focuses too, because then we're coming at it from different angles. Yeah.
Well, I just think it's important to define what your focus is, because if your focus, like I say, if your focus is to determine what God said,
yeah, that's not
and
either
you
of our
believe
goals.
that he actually dictated it in a certain language with certain words that I no longer speak, and only like 24 people who reside in universities do, I'm going to have a very difficult time accessing the divine. Right? If that's what we're going here. And, a lot of people can say just about anything. They're like, oh, no, because it seems to me, I'm just always skeptical when I see it written that here's this word, this passage, and we're quoting the King James or something in this article or whatever. And then, but actually this particular word here is this particular Hebrew and something like this, and it means something else. Okay, well, did you do that to every other word in that passage? That's
not every word necessarily is gonna have different interpretive potential. Like some things are just like, oh, that just means sword, it means a sword, like some things it's like there's no room for interpretation.
Or maybe it doesn't, maybe it means weapon, or maybe it means bladed weapon.
Yeah, but or maybe it doesn't. And so they're probably not going to focus on what does have multiple.
But I'm still reading what they tell me is important, but I'm still questioning, like, is there something else that was important that you're not telling me? I mean, I don't know, because I don't speak ancient.
The only way you can answer that is to study it yourself. So,
and I don't, and so that's it. But I don't believe I'm accessing divine knowledge by reading this. So it doesn't matter to me that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
for
interesting.
a certain level of analysis, that I am not reading this in the actual language that I think a God dictated it to a human.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And then for me, it's like I'm big into mythology. If you can't tell, a random mythology statue sitting over there. So that's like where I'm going to be coming from it mentally is like, yeah, as a myth. So I want it in its oldest form, at the oldest form I can get to it. And also some of the things we'll talk about is like how that has changed over time and like how people interpret the myth, because that also has, that has interesting implications about different periods of history and the culture, throughout the past, however long it's been since this has been written. I forget, I think I wrote it down, but it's like, it's been 2.5 millennia at least. Did I write? Let me see if that's in my notes here. Oh, I did. So one of these stories we'll get to in a second. One of them was written in the 6th century BC. And then the other was written in the 10th century BC. So yeah, so a while ago. So a long time ago. But how people think about these stories has changed quite a lot over time. So it's interesting.
So I also, we were just talking about, okay, this was the version of the Bible that Brianna recommended. So I enthusiastically went out and bought it and read the stories in the New Revised Standard Version, and read all of the annotations and also the introduction to the chapter that was in this, and I thought it was very good. But the other version, or the other Bible that I wanted to get for the sake of this analysis, was this particular one, because it has been so personally influential on me. So we'll be talking about this as well. This is Dake's annotated. I think I've said that, made that mistake several times.
Anointed.
The Dake's annotated reference Bible here, and it is based on the King James Bible. And the reason I wanted to get this, I have not read this in decades. But the reason that I wanted to get this one to refresh my memory on it is because as a child, and we're talking about elementary school, probably 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, I remember that my grandfather, as a Southern Baptist preacher, I would go to church with him when he was, preaching, like during the summers when we were staying at my grandparents' house and whatever. And of course, the Bibles would be in the back seat with me, all going to church. And my grandfather's main Bible was a Dake's annotated reference Bible. And so it actually would take a while for us to get to church because this is a southern rural church. And so we'd actually be in church for a while. And for whatever reason, I decided to pick up that Bible and start reading. And this Bible and its annotated references certainly were influential on me personally, because this is the one that talks about, and particularly in these early chapters, we're talking about a pre-Adamite civilization and the angels rule, and specifically Lucifer ruling the earth, and how the angels ruled different planets prior to the existence of Adam and Eve. And like he's got in here listed out evidence for the existence of the pre-Adamite civilizations and what it was like when Lucifer ruled the world and all of that. And, you know, where Jesus talks about that, or, you know, alludes to it in other places and things like that. And that has certainly been influenced, because when I read that as a kid, I was reading that in the back of their car as we were going to church, going, whoa, nobody ever talks about something like that. Like in any church service that I've been to, like Lucifer ruling, you know, the earth as a civilization of angels, and a rebellion and a war that resulted in the destruction of the earth, you know, prior to the existence of Adam and Eve. And so I returned to it actually for the first time today. I spent several hours today going back through all of this, and I was refreshing my memory on that, because obviously it's influential on me from the literary perspective, that spawned one of the whole worlds that I want to create, which is a pre-Adamite civilization of Lucifer and his fall and things like that. So I can't underestimate. Yeah, I can't underestimate the influence of this particular annotation, and it influenced me also because I'm not talking about truth here. I'm just talking about that. I would say that this is a rather scholarly analysis. That it's like, hey, you know what? Your general understanding. This, I think it could have been like my first encounter with an idea that, hey, you know, the days of creation might not have been literal days, you know, and here's why. And he outlines it in the Bible. And he also says in here, of course, because I was very science-minded too at the time, and he talks about how there is a difference between the starting creation of the earth in Genesis 1, verse 1, and that is different from what happens in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, and that there could be an untold amount of time between that. And so he's saying it doesn't matter if geologists tell us that the world is millions and millions of years old, whatever, that's fine. That lines up with what's in the Bible, because we only know, like, it's not 6,000 years old. It's been 6,000 years since this event, and there could have been tens of millions of years or whatever when Lucifer was ruling this planet and all of this, you know, and that's here it is in the Bible. So that's the first time I'd ever encountered something like that. And so that's why I got this. I was like, I want to go back to it. I did find out, okay, so I was like, so where did this come from? Because my grandfather was a Southern Baptist minister, but actually, okay, this book, as it turns out, was an American Pentecostal minister, known for his writings on the subjects of Pentecostal or charismatic evangelical Christian spirituality and dispensationalism.
That's fascinating, because that's more like what my early childhood was, and that wasn't really yours. Except for that book, right? Yeah.
Right. It kind of surprises me. And I started to and I didn't get to do this, so I'm not going to bring this up, but I was trying to diagram this out. Because I was like, okay, some of the things that my grandfather had told me being Southern Baptist are clearly influenced by this annotation of the Bible. And yet it is Pentecostal and charismatic evangelical and dispensationalist in approach. So maybe if we do get to come back to this idea, we'll come back to some kind of diagram or something about the different kinds of influences here, because I would not have associated like my chain of thought with Pentecostal lines of thought, but clearly it actually was. But I thought about that with you. Yeah, that actually sounds like more like something that you had been exposed to as a child.
Right. For the up until my, I guess, early teens, that was very much my experience. It was very overtly Pentecostal with, I mean, it was generally non-denominational, but it was Pentecostal and influenced with a little touch of like I guess maybe Southern Black Baptist kind of a feel. So kind of like the inverse, I guess. So like it was like mainly more Pentecostal, but absolutely had especially like the worship style. The worship style was very like Black Baptist, I think, is how you would categorize that. And yeah, and then as a teenager, I shifted into a just like a standard evangelical megachurch that looked very, very much looked down on Pentecostalism and like very much like, those weirdos. So it was a shift, but yeah.
Yeah, I had even heard.
Well, I was just going to mention, like growing up, I was seeing like, the like faith healings and speaking in tongues, that kind of stuff. Actually, I could speak in tongues. I probably still could if I tried, but I could.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I think I've heard my father talk about a couple of these different ideas only on rare occasions of like a pre-Adamite civilization and when Lucifer had ruled the world and all of that, even though he is an Anglican priest and was in the Episcopal Church for a while. And so I may end up having to diagram out some of these thoughts maybe one day that comes up here. But so Robert for $1.99. Thank you very much, Robert. Robert says on Genesis, Rashi's commentaries are indispensable. I don't know them. A French rabbi?
Oh, fascinating.
I do not know them. I'm going to make note of that over here, though.
Yeah, another table talk for later.
You're
Yeah,
right.
I think a lot of this just shows how much, these categories of different Christian denominations exist on paper, but in real life, there's a lot of fuzzy edges that individual people and individual churches, individual pastors have in terms of like where they're getting the influence, what people's beliefs are. So the real world is messier. not always, doesn't always fit to these really clearly defined boundaries. So yeah.
So anyway, so those are kind of that's what I have been studying kind of in preparation for this and thinking about. But you want to take it away, Brianna?
Sure. Yeah, so we're going to start by talking about it from a literary perspective. And I kind of want to frame that a little bit because a good way to look at Genesis 1 through 3 is basically as two distinct stories. And the reason why that is because you can see that they actually are, I mean, even when you're reading like a translation, as I'll point it out and you all will be able to see it if you hadn't noticed before, but they are written in two different styles. But even like in the original translation, it's very clearly from two different eras, so it's like it'd be like the difference between if you're reading something written in English in the middle of the 1900s versus if you're reading something written in English in 1600s. You can tell it's from a different era. So it's the same way, like we know that these two stories were written centuries apart. So the original Hebrew is different, and so we know that one, for example, so there's several different sources in Genesis. I'm going to reference the what is it? Oh, why, hi, kitty. There's a cat that's trapped in my room. Did you want to get out? Oh, you poor thing. You didn't mean to get trapped in there. You want to go out? You want to go out?
Okay.
Come here. You want to go out there? Yes? No? No? Okay. He wants to stay under my bed. That's very funny. This cat used to be scared of me, and now he's spending his time in my room. Anyway, okay, that's my sister's cat who lives with me. Where was I? Okay, so there's multiple different sources in Genesis. Let's see what there's the J source, which is known for like it's a very anthropomorphic God. There's the E, there's the Elohist source where God's like more distant. There's D, extra P, elsewhere. And there's also P for the priestly source. And so that one is more concerned with like the rules and the laws and stuff like that and kind of justifying them. So Genesis 1 through 3 comes from two sources. Genesis 1 comes from the priestly source. And Genesis 2 through 3 is the J source. And you can tell, like, because the way that the creation is described is different. It's a different style. And you know, in the J source, it's much more anthropomorphic. You have like a physical God coming and like shaping the earth. You know, like these are the visuals that you get are very evocative of like a physical being, which you don't have in all the other stories. Which when you realize that these are different texts that someone at some point kind of stitched together, it makes some of the inconsistencies in the Bible make sense. And especially in Genesis, like you'll see like God's described in different ways at different times, and that's one of the reasons. Well, hi.
Well, that was also. Let me turn this off. That was also a very interesting realization that it was that I came to as it was talking about this, when it was talking about different sources of biblical scripture, talking about different ideas on the perspective of God and their relation and his relationship with people.
Yes,
from the removed to the personal. And I've thought about that a lot when we were talking about, and I hope that we will, or when I've been thinking about, and I hope we get to talk about this more, differing views on Christianity throughout the ages. And now, you know, this idea of a very personal God. Well, is that there? Well, yes, it's there in certain times, in certain perspectives. And so this is telling me that there is a certain, perhaps narrative scriptural tradition from which certain original documents portray the God in that way, and that we are trying to synthesize them with a different tradition of documents, J versus E, like you're talking about, that are trying to synthesize the deity with something that is potentially plural and removed from humanity. So where do you get these things? Like, I mean, I think a lot about, like, okay, we can talk about what's right or wrong, you know, when you're talking about something, but often it seems to me that it makes more sense to think about, if this person believes X or Y, why can they believe that, and why can that be coherent? You know, so in this case, if you're talking about a personal God, okay, now whether or not that's right or wrong isn't particularly interesting to me, because I don't believe there is a personal God or a removed God. But if we've got people who believe in this personal God, why can they believe that, and why can that be a coherent narrative that they believe? And if you believe in a more removed God, how can that be a coherent narrative? And this kind of offers an explanation there from the very beginning of this text by trying to do a synthesis of those two.
Yeah, potentially. Although sometimes I feel like this is another thing that's interesting to think about from an interpretive perspective and how that changes over time. Because I think some of this is true for a lot of like the Old Testament, actually really throughout the Bible. In ancient times, there wasn't as much of a concern with like literal, you know, a sort of a factual, news-based kind of a way of like writing down information, the way we kind of think about it in the modern age. Like if we're writing down things that happen in history, we're trying to be really accurate about what happened, right? That wasn't necessarily the goal in a lot of ancient writers. Like there's a stronger storytelling aspect, and you know, kind of creating meaning around things. And so what I'm getting at is that it wouldn't have disturbed I doubt that it would have disturbed the person assembling Genesis if you accepted these two different stories as distinct. Like if you like, I don't think there is been trying to combine the two different creation stories, at least. Like they are kind of sitting next to each other, and I think that's fine. As in, like, I think that would have been fine in the oldest sense, like the very original people reading and putting this together. Probably would not have been like concerned about questions like which one is true, or are they both true? Like that's not really what they're asking, you know. And also like specifically when we're talking about it from like the scientific side of things, that most people read these stories as like metaphor for most of history, including most of Christian history up until like the scientific age. So I think that there's like this an early acceptance of it being a story, but still an important story that meant a lot to the culture for various reasons, right? Because both of these stories, from a literary perspective, as I'll get into, are accomplishing different things. But yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a subject that's going to come up a lot as we start to study several of these ancient texts, because we talked about the Iliad. We got I've been going through the Odyssey now, almost done with the Iliad. We're gonna be so when I was talking about, the conceit of the humanities is that humans across time and space are essentially the same. That's what it means to study the humanities, that we're studying the same thing, that we have themes of loss and heroism and bravery and and death, and that we connect with so many of these same things because we're all the same across time and space. That's the idea of the ability to study the humanities. So, and that's why when I read something like Genesis or the Iliad or the Odyssey, I feel like I'm connecting to someone. That these are people who are essentially the same as me. Yeah, I've got the internet and I've got a car, but when we're talking about the essential themes that we are trying to address, it's the same. That's doesn't necessarily have to be true. So someone who rejects the foundation of the humanities would say, no, when you're talking about somebody who lived in 5000 BC, they are completely different from you. You do not have any kind of, common experience with them, so your understanding of their literature is completely wrong, or something like that, or that you can't understand their literature because like you can't even connect with them on an emotional level. I guess that would be the antithesis of that kind of thing. So I say that because so I struggle with, how did someone in, let's say, 3000 BC or 2000 BC or whatever,
right,
engage with these stories? I'm not sure, because this does say, like you're talking about, like, oh yeah, man, the truth value of this didn't even start to come up until the scientific, revolution or the industrial revolution or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if people are people, then there are people who are like, I want to know what's true. They might not have had the scientific method to express that. But, were there people then who are like, yeah, I don't really think that's true.
I mean, there have always been people like that. I think there's always been people who, kind of participate in the dominant religion of their time because it's what people do, but I think how much any individual takes it really seriously or literally is going to vary. And we definitely have evidence of that. Well, less so whenever it's really socially unacceptable to be that way, but we do that.
Okay, but I'm just saying that as much, so part of me says that yes, I completely connect to these people because we are all part of a common humanity and they're telling stories about all of the things like that. But on the other hand, I'm like, my world is, but on the other hand, I understand the allure and power of the idea that my world sitting here in 2024 is so different than their world. That what would they have actually thought?
I think there's always going to be an element of both, right? Because it's I
know that's why it tears at me. That's why it tears at me.
Right, and it's hard trying to figure out where that line is, essentially, of
right.
What I want to say. Here's how I would think about it. It's culture changes. I mean, this is obvious, but I think there's something more in depth that we could explore here. It's culture changes, but fundamental emotions don't, and fundamental how would I say, well, I don't know. Psychology is complicated because our psychology can be influenced by our culture, but there's going to be that maybe that's just the framework to come back to think about, where it's when we are reading an older story, we're connecting with these people's emotions, but the things that trigger their emotions are completely different circumstances, and they're going to have different beliefs, I guess. Sorry, everything I'm saying is really obvious. I'm trying to get at something a little bit more meaningful, but maybe there's nothing else to really say about that. It's just yeah. It's the culture. It's the culture.
Well,
I'm like deep into. I just finished reading the histories in the Old Testament. I just moved into Job, and it's like the thing that I keep coming back to again and again. That is the difference. Is like the vast difference in like moral values in like a Bronze Age violent society compared to modern day. That's a thing that keeps coming up. I'm like, that is a thing that is so different. The way these people are thinking, the way their priorities are is so different. But I feel like that comes down to circumstance too, because it's like, you know, the whole hierarchy of needs thing. Like you're not going to be, there are certain kinds of things you're not really worried about yet, certain kind of moral questions, because you're like, I'm trying to survive. I'm trying to not get murdered. You know, like there's this enemy army that's going to come and invade my city, and a bunch of people are going to get slaughtered and raped and all this horrible stuff. And like, you're not as concerned about like, should, or like, you know, something super removed, like, should women be allowed to be in government? Like, that's not what people are worried about. They have more fundamental primal problems they're trying to solve. They're trying to not starve if there's a, what's the word? Like a famine, right? Like, so there are other issues that are happening. I think that's partially why you'll have different values, because you have different problems you're solving. But if they're still same kind of people, you know, I think any of us in that same situation would probably have the same priorities, just by necessity.
My point is, I'm just saying that's a struggle. That I come at this from the position that I believe the fundamental foundation of the humanities, that we are a Homo sapien, human being. We experience the same kinds of things, themes in storytelling. We're talking about that we experience these same things across time and across place. And that's what allows us to connect. So I'm coming at it from that perspective, but I also have a major realization that a Bronze Age Egyptian could have a completely alien thought process to me. And I would love to go back to, the some Egyptian, or ancient Greek, when the, the Odyssey is being written, and Homer's writing that, like, what are they thinking? I mean, clearly they're communicating things that resonate with us today. But man, does that mean that I really understand what it's like to be an ancient Greek or an ancient Hebrew, like we're talking about here? Maybe not. I'm open to the idea that maybe not. That's
I think that's a really good thing to bring in, that there's an element of humility that we should have, that there's going to be some things that we are not going to know, and things that we're not going to know we don't know. Like, we're going to have some things that are going to be incorrect, and to just kind of accept that we're engaging with these stories imperfectly and imperfectly. And that's just how it's going to be.
Because we know so little about these people. I mean, it's precious that we have, this kind of documentation, and our, the Iliad and the Odyssey and all of that, and the scarce bits of archaeological evidence that we do and things like that. But if you want to go back, hey, what was it like to live in Carthage in 300 BC? Man, I don't really know. I mean,
it is precious, because there's a point where we don't have that. Like, you go back, if you want to ask what it was like to be a human 50,000 years ago, we really don't know. We have only the vaguest sense. Like, we have really, it's kind of guesswork. Like, we don't really know what it was like, because it's just not recorded. We don't have it's too long ago.
And I oscillate. I personally oscillate as I'm reading these things by feeling very connected to them. Like, oh my God, I will oscillate between feeling like, oh my God, history is very short. I mean, the study of, let's say, Western civilization or whatever. Oh man, that hasn't been that long. And we've got, kind of a direct kind of route to understanding how we got here. I oscillate between feeling that and feeling like, oh my God, this has been a twisting, torturous journey, and I don't understand these people at all. I mean, I oscillate between those two. So I'm admitting that in my analysis as we're coming forward.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Let me see what else I want to. I feel like I'm kind of like looking at some of the things that I noted in this book before I go into my notes on the computer. Yeah, I am. Oh, wait, how many more? No, I think that's all I had on there. I'm ready to start getting into the story itself. If you
Okay.
are.
This is a very peaceful story. Is it not?
I feel like which one? Just in general.
Just in generally speaking.
Wait, quick framing, because I feel like I would love to just kind of talk about Genesis 1.
Okay, go ahead.
Talk about Genesis 2, and then come back and compare them. Because there are a few things I just want to talk about in general, things that I enjoy. So for example, I'm a weirdo. Okay, like I can get goosebumps very easily, and I'm very moved by things very easily. And one of the things that moves me every time is the very first sentence in Genesis and in the Bible. There's something about that is just so God. It's so primal and archetypal. This concept of like, in the beginning, there's darkness, and I love that. And that is a motif that we find in other creation stories too. And there's something, a formless void, darkness covered the face of the deep. That's the way mine starts. It's like, that is so cool. I love one of the things I love about creation stories is these. They're kind of trying to get to something really, really fundamental. Like, what would it be like if we were to take everything that's around us right now and take it to its origin? What would its origin be? And the answer in this particular story is, a formless void and darkness. It's like, ooh, that does something for me on like some primal level.
Chaos.
Yeah, you're right. It's chaos. You're right. That's what that archetype is. Yep.
Arguably, not according to some, but arguably this begins in chaos.
I love that. Yeah. I don't know why, I just do. maybe it's because there's something that kind of, I don't want to bring in too much like interpretation or anything in yet, but like there's something about, I think that's also why I'm so fascinated by like our actual scientific understandings thus far of the origin of things, because it is mysterious. Like, it's like there's a point where it's like there wasn't time or matter. Like there's none of those terms even make sense. There was like this mystery, chaotic, there aren't any words for it, or at least we can't measure it. We look far back enough and we don't know what's beyond there. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang, right? Or if they happened isn't even a meaningful phrase. But I love that opening. And then the first thing that, well, you would say the first thing that comes is light, but that's not actually true, because there is something. There's like wind, there's waters, there's a void. And I'm gonna show a diagram in a second of ancient Near Eastern cosmology, which it kind of explains what all that means. But it's not nothing.
So, but my entire world that I want to build comes between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2.
Ooh, okay. Tell us more about that.
We don't want to go beyond that, because that's what I was saying. It's arguably without void, but the argument that Dake is making here, and the entire argument from that here, is that chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, occurs in a nameless past.
Okay.
However long ago, that could be millions and millions of years ago. But then the earth was made without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And they say clearly there's a contrast between verse 1 and verse 2, because it tells us very clearly that God created the heaven and the earth, and God creates no junk. And yet in verse 2, we find that the earth is without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And that means that something happened to the earth between verses 1 and verse 2. And what he is saying happened here was the destruction of the world from Lucifer's rebellion and the flood of the earth that resulted from it. I was like, my God. My God.
That's a lot to insert into there, but that's cool. That's very inspiring.
I know it is. I know it is. Like, we are starting with the first two verses, and we're inserting a lot here, that God created earth and heaven in the beginning at some nameless time. and then you jump forward some gigantic amount of time, or like some unspecified amount of time, and suddenly the earth is without form and void, and darkness is beyond the face of the deep, because the firmament was rent asunder during Lucifer's war of rebellion, which flooded the earth and destroyed it. And so by the time when you pick up at Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, you are looking at a world that has been destroyed by Lucifer's rebellion. And I was like, I love this. I love this.
And I can
so
see how that would have
pick up
inspired you.
Right. Yeah. So if you're looking for a place later when we get to the serpent, that, oh, the serpent must already be a fallen creature by the time we're at Adam and Eve. Like there's already been sin introduced into the world. Well, when would that have happened? According to this theory, between verse 1, chapter 1, and verse 2, chapter 1. Right? So that's where you put an entire civilization of angels upon the planet and everything like that. And then you get into the people who are talking about all the different ancient civilizations that might have been on Earth, and like the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and all of that. That's where they put it. That's why, because they talk about the difference between the idea of creating something, that something is created. God created heaven and earth in the beginning, but then it was made formless and void and whatever. And they're talking about what's the difference between creating something and making something. Because you can not have created something and make it terrible. You know, the difference between that language. So that's it. So as soon as I read that was like, oh my God. And that starts to introduce to me, and as I interpret it now, kind of some other pagan kinds of elements, because this is in generally such a peaceful kind of story. But once you interject something like this about the war and the destruction of the earth, because a lot of the creation stories will have, you know, like you're creating the world from the carcass of a dead monster or something that you got to go and slay, which is not happening here. But hey, if we need to introduce some war and destruction, all right, that's how you can do it.
Interesting. That's so, I've never heard that before. That's really interesting. Although I have heard some of my I guess more evangelical Christian family members make mentioning of like ancient civilizations. I wonder if they're referencing these kinds of ideas, because I heard them talk about that. Yeah.
And because I wonder like how the diagram of that idea dispersed and spread. I would be interested.
Yeah. That's really inspiring. Things like that are inspiring, I think, in particular because they evoke questions. I've been having those kind of moments a lot in certain parts of the Bible where I'm like, whoa, but I want to know more. Like Esther in particular. I just read Esther, and there's so much in that story, which I know Cameron is writing an Esther story. I'm really curious about it, because there's that story is really short, and yet it evokes so many questions in my mind. I'm like, wait, but why did he choose her over the other women? Like what did she do? like was she really good and bad or something? Like there's just all these questions that it evokes. And yeah, there's a lot of that in the Bible, where there's certain things where I'm like, okay, this is too much. I'm not interested in reading about, you know, so-and-so's ancestors, or like how many things they used to build the temple. Like some things are boring to me, but then there's some things that are so just simple, and I'm like, whoa, wait, but what more? Like I want to know more depth. So yeah, I love that feeling of like just like what it opens up in your mind, and then you want to go and answer those questions. Okay, what else do I want to say about this story so far? Yeah, so that was the main thing that I absolutely love about chapter 1. And I'll get into some more depths in a second when we compare the two, but I'll be just pause and see if there's anything else you wanted to say about it before we talk about 2.
You're done with chapter 1?
Huh?
You're done with chapter 1?
Well, just for now, and I'm going to go and compare the 2, and then we'll talk in more depth, but just some sort of high level stuff, I guess.
Okay. Well, I would also say that just aligning that line of thought that I was just talking about later, that people always talk about what is the command to Adam and Eve. Is it to go replenish the earth? Because at least when you're looking at the King James Bible, the command is to replenish. And and he makes a note that that's the same command given to Moses. And so why would Adam and Eve need to replenish the earth if they were the first humans? So this person uses that, and I've seen this in multiple places used as that.
Yeah,
as
because it's interesting.
evidence.
Because my translation doesn't say that. It just says, "Be
Yeah, yours
fruitful,
doesn't say that.
multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion," which is another well, that aspect of having dominion. I'll have a note on that, but
Yes,
I'll finish.
I figured we want to talk about that. But like here, because like I said, that's why I started off with the idea of what does the translation mean, and can we get to truth, and what does that mean? Because this translation says, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." Okay, well, if you read that, then yes,
Yeah,
why in the world would Adam and Eve need to replenish the earth? Because, and then they're like, okay, that's further evidence that there was a whole civilization of humans on the earth before Adam and Eve, and now we're redoing things and we're starting over, and they've got to replenish in the same way that Noah has to do that later. So then people, so what is that word? What word was actually there? Well, I don't know. But I know that the idea that this word replenish was there has certainly had a tremendous amount of theological impact to a certain group of people who have read this particular translation.
Right.
And had a lot of impact. So that's what I know.
That's interesting. That aspect of dominion. So I'm basically, I think I mentioned this, but I'm reading through the Bible right now with my roommate Karina, and so every single week we get together and we read some of it and then we discuss it, and we do talk quite a lot about like influence on culture, and that was one that we spent a lot of time talking about because we noted that is something that is in these stories, the idea that mankind is meant to have dominion and is meant to kind of rule the earth and use it for mankind's purposes. And that is a super influential idea in the West that has its roots in the Bible. Like people very specifically reference that and be like, oh, it's our command to rule the earth. And that's a very different relationship with nature than you will find in other cosmologies out there. There are lots of cultures that don't have that attitude. They're like, oh, we're not meant to, like especially like you find it a lot in various different American indigenous ideas of like, oh, we are part of nature. Like we're interacting with nature. We are nature. And their creation stories will reflect that idea that like we're meant to be in harmony with it. And so that's a very Western idea rooted in the biblical creation story that no, we're not in harmony with nature. We're in charge of nature and it's there to serve us. So that's I think a really interesting thing to note.
I think that it is. Yes, I agree. And I was thinking about, and hopefully we'll get to talk about this more, the influence of Christian thought on Western thinking. And I think that is definitely one of the major aspects.
Yeah, that's a huge
one. I mean, there are a lot of them, but that's one of the major ones, right? What is humanity's relationship with nature? Well,
yeah.
That's spelled out right here. And like, and see, that's another one of those situations. I'm not going to say this every time, but that's another one of those situations that who knows? What does this word dominion mean? What do you go back to? Whatever, ancient, whatever, and it means whatever. I don't know if that matters. If it's dominion in, for instance, the King James Version, that's been hugely influential on Western thought.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it really does reflect the relationship that we actually do have to nature. Like we do treat it that way, like as a resource to serve us, even how we interact with animals, how we have, throughout the past, it's been like, which I mean, some of that is you find in all sorts of, there's an element of that's universal, but the specific way that we think about nature in the West is very influenced by this story. So yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to try not to use that word too many times. Yeah. So this story basically is Genesis 1, but it technically kind of goes to Genesis 2-3. And that's where that story, it's kind of awkwardly cut off. It's not exactly at the chapter end.
Right.
And then we begin a new story. A new way to tell the creation story. Which just like when we discussed the two different nativity stories, these have been kind of in Western thought, they've been combined into one story. And so, if you're looking specifically at the Western influence, you can kind of do that, force them to be together. But in looking at kind of the original intent and from a literary perspective, what these stories do, you got to look at them separately.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important.
Oh, sorry,
yeah, I think we should do that now. I think that's an important point because I thought that Brianna was going to do this because we did have a table talk on the Christmas Story and we compared the two different ones and we talked about, and I think this is really important, that when you talk about the Christmas Story in just the typical Western understanding, you get something that is not actually written in the Bible. You get a hybrid of two different stories that are written in the Bible that kind of blend and whatever, and sometimes leave things out, like the massacre of the innocents, like that. Okay, and you get like when you're reading, I'm talking about like when even I was read like a Christmas story as a child, like a children's Christmas book. You know, you're reading a child's version of an amalgamation of two different stories, and that's exactly the same way that it is with the creation story in Adam and Eve. If you were to pick up like a children's story that's, all right, let's talk about Adam and Eve and the creation of the earth, you're reading a blend.
Yeah, which is not actually in the Bible, and that
someone's blend of those things.
Yeah, and once you recognize that, it becomes so obvious. It was so weird to me because I hadn't yet read. I was reading it for the first time with that understanding, and it was like, how did I not see it before? Like things happen in a completely different order. Even the tone is different. Like it's a very different style of storytelling, and you can even see that in the translation. Like I don't need to go back into the original Hebrew. Like you can tell that they are two different stories. They really do feel like it. So let's go ahead and let me share my screen, and I'll share my breakdown here. No, where am I? Wrong tab. Hold on. Present, share screen. I've got so many tabs open. Okay, that's the one. All right. Is it up?
Let me see. Okay, I'm bring it up. There we go. All right.
All right. Okay, so the two creation stories of Genesis. So as I mentioned before, these are written centuries apart. One is from the P source, which stands for priestly. The other is the J, which stands for Yahweh. Just go with it. A lot of Y's.
It was well, because I was reading, I think it was in here. It's from the German. There was an original German scholar. So Yahweh has a J in German. And so that's why it's called J.
Yeah. Okay. So the P source is younger. So this one's written in the 6th century BC, while the Hebrews were a conquered people in exile. And that's actually very interesting to note because a lot of the stuff that was written in the Bible during that time period focuses on Jewish identity. It focuses on like, who are we as a people? Because, they're separated from their homeland. So they're defining who we are as a people. And a lot of that is them becoming people of the book. And then becoming, really emphasizing the rules that they're supposed to follow and how they're sacred and how that defines them as a people. So that's very much reflected in Genesis 1. And the J source, the Genesis 2, was written in the 10th century BC during King Solomon's reign. So at this point, Israel is a very powerful nation. It's a very self-confident, kind of a situation. They're at their height. So kind of almost in opposite situations historically, is the context between these two stories. Okay. So I also did like some highlighting here to show things that are similar. So in the first story, as we just mentioned, Earth starts off dark and formless. In Genesis 2, it's very clearly on the same day that God created the earth and the heavens. Before he made any plants, he makes man out of dust. So it kind of describes. Let me actually pull it up. It's a very different start. I'll just read what it says. So it says, this is Genesis 2:4. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground, but a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. So it describes him as kind of making the earth and the heavens, and then he makes man out of the ground. And so he hasn't made
a very physical process of forming.
Yeah, yeah, and that's very common in the J source. It's very physical, right? He's like using it evokes a sense that he's like using his hands to form mankind. It doesn't literally say that, but that's kind of what it evokes, right?
It evokes a potter.
It evokes, what'd you say? Oh yeah, like a potter, exactly.
Potter.
Uh-huh.
To me, it does.
Yeah, yeah. So Genesis 2, he creates, I'm sorry, go back to the first one. Genesis 1, he's creating, he creates light, he creates day and night, the first day. He creates the dome sky. He creates the earth and the seas. Then he creates vegetation. Then he creates the stars, sun, and the moons, sea creatures, flying creatures, land creatures. And at the end, he creates humankind, male and female, at the same time. It's very much implied that we don't have anything about him making Adam and then making Eve. He makes mankind, and he gives them domain over creation. And then on the seventh day, he rests, right? So that the order is completely different here, right? So as I just mentioned, he in the other story, he makes mankind. He makes the heavens and the earth, and it's all very, you kind of get the sense of like a barren, like dirt earth, right? And out of that dirt, he creates man, just the male form. He just makes a man, and then he builds a garden. So he creates the vegetation after he creates man.
Yeah, he creates the garden after the garden. Adam pre-existed the Garden of Eden.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Pre-exist the Garden of Eden
in theophany.
Okay, good. And pre-exist, I would argue, all vegetation. So after that, because it does say it's like before any plants are on the ground. So then he creates vegetation. And then in a kind of humorous way, he creates all of these land animals and flying animals, and he presents them to the man, one after the other. He's like, all right, here's this one and this one. And man kind of looks at all of them. By the way, I'm saying man because my translation doesn't say Adam, but when you understand, like, Adam literally is just like, what is it? I'm trying to remember in the original. It's kind of a play on words, like in the original Hebrew. I feel like it's like it's very similar, just saying dirt.
Oh, I think I saw this.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like a word like man and ground is like they're very closely connected. So just saying the man is also a pretty accurate translation, because I don't think he's not necessarily named in that kind of a way. I might be wrong, but
well, this was, I brought this up before. This was the most shocking realization that I made as a result of this analysis.
Yeah.
As a result from this show is the comedy.
Yeah.
Of the creation of Eve. I had never realized that until now, and I was reading in this the annotated Oxford Bible right here. So let me see what it says. It says, so that in 19 to 20, animals are created after the first human rather than before. The human's naming of the animals implies a dominion over them, analogous to that seen in 1:26 to 28 Genesis. Mm-hmm. Yet the Lord God here, talking about this in chapter 2 Genesis, yet the Lord God here contradicts the all-powerful deity depicting it in chapter 1, because the Lord God creates the animals in a comical, failed attempt to make a truly corresponding helper for the man. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? No.
And this is the older story too, right? So later we have a more respectable, right? Genesis 1 is the more recent story. That's a more respectable, distant, all-powerful kind of a deity. But then here it's a little bit more anthropomorphic.
So I had never read that in this way before, but then I went up. I was like, so what does it say? Hang on. So this is from the new Revised Standard Version. It says, then the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper as his partner. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then that's when he says, so out of the ground, the Lord God formed every animal in the field and every bird in the air and brought them to man. Right. I mean, this could be in a comedy web series right here. I mean, you can completely see that. And brought him to see what he would call them, and whatever the man called every living creature, that was his name. But it says, the man gave names to all the cattle and the birds of the air and to every animal in the field. But for the man, there was not found a helper as his partner. I mean, you completely write that as a comedy. Like,
You know,
like,
oh no,
okay,
I can't do
here
this
is
bat. That's not gonna work. This cow,
yeah,
no, sorry.
here's a
And God's
bat.
like, okay, oh well,
Here,
let me try this. What about this
here-
one? He's like,
here's a
no.
crab. Like, can your helper be this crab? Okay, no, not really. Well, I do have this amoeba over here. I made this really cool amoeba. Okay, no, not that. I mean, okay, all right, but that is what's written, and I had never
Yeah.
noticed that
Yeah,
before.
it's funny.
The comedy of that scene of God trying to figure out how to create something that will be the helper for the man.
Yeah. And that word helper, by the way, too, there are some translations that maybe not even translations, this might be more interpretive thing. There are, people make that very misogynistic, right? They make it patriarchal, like she's there to submit to him and serve him. That's not actually the original meaning. It is much more like the word there, I forget, I wonder if it's here. It's just, this is actually something I learned back when I was a Christian. Fun fact. Where is it? Basically the word that's used there, helper, is also a word that's sometimes used to describe God and his relationship with people. So it's not a hierarchical term. It's very much like there's a kind of an affection there, I feel like.
Well, then over the help meet is also something that's also needed.
Yeah.
Help me. We need help me. I will make, okay, that's the King James version I got over here. I will make him a help meet for him. Hey, Kirwan. And
oh, sorry. I just realized I missed something I wanted to mention about Genesis 1, which was cool, was that the earth in that story it's a feminine noun in Hebrew, which is like a very common thing that we see in lots of mythologies, right? Of this association of the earth with the feminine. So I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah, the feminine earth bringing forth life, which is, God's interacting with the earth and creating man and life out of it. So that's very evocative. But yes, let me see if I have it.
Yes, so that is interesting. I saw that too. An association of earth with the feminine.
Yep. Yeah, okay. I don't have mine thing doesn't give the exact word, but I remember learning it once in a sermon like a long time ago. Someone brought that up, like the original word that's used there as helper. So anyway, that's interesting. But yeah, so it's very comical. None of these animals work as a suitable partner. So God puts the man to sleep and creates a woman out of his rib.
Which is used here in this Dake's Anointed Annotated Reference Bible as an example of God as an anesthesiologist. This is the first example of anesthesia that God does this. Adam goes to sleep, and then we perform a surgery on him.
Which is, again, very anthropomorphic, right? Very different from the God we see in Genesis 1. Like he's, he has to put him, because in the other one, he's creating things out of his words, right? He says it and then it appears. Whereas here, he's physically fashioning something. He has to put him to sleep, open him up, take out a rib, and then transforms that rib into a person. So very different style of creation.
And again, I didn't get to watch this video, but as I was watching some things on, Genesis analysis and whatever, I was trying to get some other perspectives. I saw a video go by that was like, why rib is mistranslated. Okay, so maybe it's mistranslated. Maybe there's something else about the rib. But on the other hand, it's very embedded in Western culture that Eve is made out of a rib. So we go from there. And the meaning of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember listening to sermons from my grandfather, who was Southern Baptist, about the significance of Eve having been created from the rib. And I have seen this over and over and over again. It has to do with the equality of men and women.
Yeah, people say that a lot. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know. I've seen that over and over and over again. And I remember hearing that from my grandfather.
Right, as opposed to
she's created from the side. Not from under his feet or anything like that she's created at his side. Right. Yeah.
All right. So then he presents the woman to the man. He accepts her as his partner. So those are the two different stories. So I did a few different breakdowns, just kind of highlighting everything here that's different. So Genesis 1, God creates in 6 days. Genesis 2, he creates in 1 day. We said on the same day that he created, la 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 la, and then it has no other description of, and then the next day. So that's that. It seems to be all that happened in 1 day. The order of things is different. He creates vegetation, creatures, then humans, and then in Genesis 2, he creates man, vegetation, creatures, then woman. In Genesis 1, he creates male and female humans at the same time. Genesis 2, he creates man before woman. The other one I mentioned before, Genesis 1, Earth starts as formless dark waters. Or if you take the interpretation that he's talking about, it's been turned and destructed, whatever. The story starts as it's formless dark waters. Genesis 2, Earth starts as ground/dust with a stream or like mist that waters the ground. Just not as inspiring as the formless dark waters, but still pretty cool.
But I also remember being in the Vacation Bible School making a terrarium.
Yeah.
And having that explained to me that how this terrarium works is the way that vegetation grew before there was rain on Earth. That there's going to be the mist and stuff like that. I remember that. Like, here's the terrarium that explains how the ecology of the Earth operated before there was rain.
I didn't make terrariums, but I definitely remember having people try to scientifically explain these things, which again is funny. It's like that's kind of a recent thing in Christian history to try to make it all make sense scientifically. So yeah, Genesis 1, God creates by speaking. In Genesis 2, God creates by forming. And then the narrative purpose, right? So in Genesis 1, the narrative purpose is to justify the Sabbath. That's why we have it in the 6 days and then the 7th day he rested. Because like I mentioned, so this was written during the time when they were in exile. That kind of stuff was extremely important while they were in exile. It was like, what are we as a people? And one of the things that defined them as a people was the fact that they took the Sabbath. So there was telling a story that justified that. This is the origins of the Sabbath, right? The narrative purpose of Genesis 2 is it's setting up the story of the serpent and the tree of knowledge, which is actually the same story. Those go together.
We go into that one, right?
Yep. All right, and then I'm going to show an example of, this is kind of a illustration of ancient Near East cosmology, which makes a lot of stuff make sense. Yes. So here we have there's the abyss of waters beneath. And there's the pillows of the earth and mountains and all this stuff. And so then up above, we have the firmament of heaven. And it's this, this dome that kind of rotates around. And there's like, you've got your stars and moons and everything like that. That's on this kind of surface level part that's rotating. And above that are the waters. There's the waters above the firmament. And then above that is heaven, the dwelling place of God. And so in the flood story that happens later, they talk about there's rain coming from the firmament. So it's like this stuff up above breaks and it comes through. And then there's also the waters under the earth come up. And that's what creates the flood. It's not rain. It's not just like plain rain. It's specifically this firmament thing breaks and the waters under the earth burst forth. So yeah, there's an element of this that this sort of scientific mind trying to make sense of Genesis that I encountered growing up, in terms of the evolution. What is it? The creationism. One of the things that creationists will argue is that they believe some of this is still real. They believe that the firmament existed at one point. There was like this surface level of water up above, and then there was all of these waters beneath the earth that exploded, and that's what caused the flood. That was something that I remember as a teenager watching like this cool animated graphic that showed us what that looked like. And it was pretty cool. It was showing all these massive geysers of water, pouring up. But anyway, that's all just imagination. But this is the kind of mindset that the Christian story is rooted in. So I thought that would be cool to share. Yeah, and that is all I've got for now to share my screen anyway.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, is there anything else that you want to discuss about creation specifically before we start talking about Adam and Eve?
Oh, about creation. Maybe not then. What did I write over here about creation? Oh, no. All right. So, all right. So we can keep going.
Yes.
So let's see what's going on over here in the comments for a moment here.
Yep.
And this would be a good place to do that. So let's see. Robert says Rashi suggests that the helper is an allegory for marriage, a helpmeet for him.
Mhm.
Opposite, if he is worthy, she shall help him. If he's unworthy, he shall be opposed to him to fight him. The implication: we are judged by how our wives treat us.
Interesting.
With the implication the woman is a determination of worthiness. Interesting. All right, we might have to look at that.
Cool. Better with Bacon said the first ever order of spare ribs.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yes. Actually, do you mind if I take a quick pause and go get some water and then come back? We can
No, go for it.
do a little
Go for it.
whatever we would call it. Quick break. I'll be right back.
Okay, quick break. I don't have break.
You need some like break music, intermission.
I don't have intermission music over here. So go ahead. I'll see what's going on in the comments. Oh, regarding this, Better with Bacon says, look, it was God's first time creating a helper. I don't know how I never noticed that. I have no idea how I never noticed that. That interpretation of that particular part of the Bible. Kirwan says, greeting. The two creation stories contradict each other, which was what we were just talking about, right? Like the classic story is a blend of these two things like that. So Love Episodes is here and says, hey, and what sect are you guys? Out of the 40K different sects, what sect are you guys? And I was just explaining that we're kind of taking an atheistic and literary analysis of the story and not any particular denomination here. Probably we would get to its influence on storytelling and civilization. Yeah, so I was kind of surprised by what I found when I was going into, okay, so what is actually this Dake's reference Bible that I had found in the back of the car when I was going to church with my grandfather? And I was like looking this guy up, and the guy who wrote this, his name is Finis Jennings Drake. Finis Jennings Dake. I will often say Drake, just like I say anointed. I know I don't mean that. But it's Dake. It's not Drake. But I will often say Drake, but it's Dake. And unfortunately, as I was looking, I was like, so what exactly, how did this Bible come to be? And then later I see on his Wikipedia page, it says conviction for debauchery and other immoral practices. And I'm like, oh no, what's going on here? So it says in 1937, during Dake's ministry in Zion, he was convicted for violating the Mann Act by willfully transporting 16-year-old Emma Barelli across the Wisconsin state line for the purpose of debauchery and other immoral practices. Oh, no. Says the May 27th, 1936 issue of the Chicago Daily Tribune reported that Dake registered at hotels in Waukegan, Bloomington, and East South Louis with the girl under the name Christian Anderson and wife, with the possibility of a jury trial and subject to penalties of up to 10 years imprisonment and a fine of $10,000. I think that's $10,000. Dake pleaded guilty and served 6 months in the House of Corrections in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Okay, so though he was maintained innocence of intent, his ordination with the Assemblies of God was revoked, and he later joined the Church of God in Cleveland, Tennessee. He eventually became independent of any denomination, although it is not known why he later ended his relationship with the Church of God. So there you go. So I was trying to track Pentecostalism and all of that, but and then that his personal life as well. So there we go. All right, Brianna.
All right, I feel refreshed. I needed to like step away.
Great.
I've been like really like my energy levels have been really high lately, and that makes me really like I'm like really intensely focused. I was like, wow, I need to step away for a second. I'm gonna like exhaust myself. Also, kind of what do you say, caffeinated today? So yes. So I'm glad I stepped away for a second. Okay. Cool. So Adam and Eve. So many things to talk about with this one. Start with the literary perspective. But yeah, Oh, I don't even know where to start with this, to be honest. Where should we start with this? One of the things that stands out to me, I guess this is relevant both to interpretation and to literary, but I want to kind of just talk about this from a literary perspective first. So it's a serpent. It's a serpent that comes to tempter. In the story, in its own story, just looking at it on itself, there's no indication that this is the devil, right? Like that is a
Right.
later interpretation that comes in many centuries later. When you're just reading it plain, it is a serpent that comes and tempts her. And I think when you're looking at it as a story, as a myth, there's probably a lot to unpack there, because serpents are a very common motif. Of course, they have lots of different meanings in lots of different cultures. But in specifically ancient Near East culture, there was an association with like wisdom, fertility, and immortality, which is perfect for this story, right? So it's not necessarily like, this is not necessarily something evil. It might be, but not necessarily. It's not necessarily implied, but that this is an intruder, right? This is definitely an intruder into this place of innocence, and it's going to change everything. It's going to change the way she sees the world, and yes. So I just wanted to make a note of that. It's crafty. Yeah, it is. It's kind of more like almost like a trickster kind of a character, I feel like, just on a pure
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And so, like, I thought it was interesting to hear that Dake says, yeah, right, that this is a snake. Satan has no power to transform himself into a snake. How does he know that? I have no idea.
How does he know that?
Satan has no power to transform himself. He is an angel and always will be, though now he's a fallen angel. A literal serpent is involved, and he gives other references. A literal serpent is involved as a tool of Satan, though, he says. Although because he says otherwise it would be unjust for God to curse it, which, I mean, that does make some sense. That, okay, like, why, if this were Satan transformed into a serpent, then why would God curse serpents? That wouldn't make sense. So that's thought on, okay, so this is an actual serpent here.
Yeah, and there's a lot of whoa, I keep hitting my computer. Sorry. There's a lot of, old myths and stories of this genre, that part of what they do is they explain why the world is the way it is. And so this kind of has one of those elements of, why do snakes not have legs? Oh, well, it's because this original snake, blah, 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 and then God cursed it. It has that same kind of a feeling of like, yeah, I mean, I could list dozens and dozens of stories that do that kind of a thing. And so it feels like it has that kind of a tone on, and in its barest form. I was going to say something else. What was it? The snake, crafty. God damn it, I forgot what I was going to say. I'm sure it was something really earth-shattering. It was going to change everyone's life.
And it has, like, when you're talking about artistic depictions, the snake, but when the snake is talking to, or the serpent is talking to Eve, he hasn't been cursed yet.
Right.
And so the curse is that he will go on his belly. And so the idea seems to be, does that mean that we're supposed to be thinking about a serpent that is standing on two legs and standing upright?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, I've seen depictions of, oh no, the snake had legs, snake legs, but it's still kind of like crawling around on his belly. It just has legs.
Kind of like a lizard.
But no, you're still kind of going on your belly if you're laying that like that. So I've seen so am I actually supposed to be thinking that the snake actually stood upright during this? Is that what kind of interpretation I'm supposed to be holding in my head when I'm thinking about the serpent tempting Eve?
That was the image that was given me when I was growing up. And
an upright serpent?
Yeah, upright with it's got legs and like almost like a two-legged thing, like its legs are up here, like arms kind of a thing. At least that's what I had in my head. I don't know.
Right, with arms. Oh, well, that's fantastic. That's fantastically interesting that you were presented with that idea of a snake with two legs and two arms. I mean, that radically
that was kind of that was what I had imagined, and that it would like put its then went down kind of like a lizard and then lost its legs. So that's probably a combination of my own imagination and what people were telling me. I don't know where the distinction is, but
I mean, that's going to be cool for some type of film depiction. Like it's like a lizard man or a snake man.
yeah, because it's not, because I feel like you have to distinguish it because it's not strictly a lizard. I think that was the reasoning, because it's like, well, if you just put legs on a snake, you kind of have a lizard.
It's kind of like a lizard, right?
But this isn't a lizard; it's a different animal. So that's why I think there's the motivation to have it be standing upright, since it says that you will now be on your belly.
That's fantastically interesting to me that your denomination actually had it standing up. And
at least that's what I had. I don't know if
That's-
that was from my
that's
parents
very
or what, but that's the image I had in my head. But yeah, and also, God damn, I just lost my train of thought again. Stop it, brain. I was gonna say something else about the snake. Oh, I was gonna say that it's interesting that that's not what we ever see in like our standard, Adam and Eve depictions. We always see like a snake roll, curling around a tree.
Right.
It's like, but that's not even what's described in the Bible. Like, it's interesting that people often don't, in the art, they don't really show. They show like the post curse snake. They don't like try to show what it was like before. Like in medieval art too. I can't think of any examples where it doesn't show that. I'm sure there are some, but I just don't know of any. Like, I feel like I always see it as like a modern day snake. Yeah.
Well, it's very rare personally that I encounter the idea of like an upright human kind of like serpent man. I have and had the idea that like this person like didn't have a soul and all of that, but I mean that's pretty rare. That's not part of mainstream thought that I see.
There's another element too. I remember what I forgot to say earlier, which is about the fact that it can talk. And this was something that I was presented when I was young, was that there was a belief, because she doesn't react to the fact that it talks to her. Have you ever thought about that? She isn't like, oh my God, it's a talking snake. She just starts talking back to it. And that was one of the things that I heard growing up, was that implies, this is kind of like the analysis that you're having from that book. It's like, we're really reading into it here, but that implies that all animals could talk, and that there was nothing abnormal, and that after the fall, they lost the ability to talk. And that was a fundamental part of my childhood worldview, is that I believed all animals around me had the ability, like they could talk, and they were intelligent enough that they could talk to me, but they were cursed, and so they lost their voice. I don't know how common that is, but that was something that I thought as a kid.
I don't know, when I think about animals talking, there was a myth I was told about Christmas, that all animals could talk at midnight on Christmas Eve.
Interesting.
They can talk, and like, so I don't know. We never like tried to stay up and listen to the cat, but I do remember joking about that like whatever, the cat's name was Muffin. Like whatever Muffin's got to say for the entire year, he's got to spit out at midnight. So, but I hadn't thought about all of the animals talking. That's very interesting. I had encountered the idea that the only talking animal in the Bible was Balaam's ass. Because Balaam, the donkey, talks to Balaam later. But I was like, that's not true, because the serpent talks here. So why is it that people are saying that the only talking animal is Balaam's ass? But maybe it's because they're giving the serpent a pass if they're equating it with Satan. Like you might say, okay, if you did that, if you had that perspective, then you'd be like, well, it's Satan talking. It's not just an animal. So the only animal we've got is the Balaam's donkey. Maybe that's what their thinking is.
And a part of the defense for this argument too was the fact that in the story with Balaam's donkey, it doesn't say God gave him the gift of speech. It was like God opened his mouth or something like that. Like it's as if, I should have to look it up, but it says something as if like it kind of, the language kind of, it does feel like it implies that like, oh, the donkey always had the ability to speak. It was just his it was taken from him or whatever. And so God temporarily revokes some of that curse of the fallen world and allows this donkey to speak. And that was kind of like, a point of evidence for that way of thinking. Yeah. Another thing, so looking at it from a literary perspective, And this is something that if we had Doug with us here, he would do this in depth. But we're all familiar with his Heroine's Labyrinth framework, and it's he talks about in a lot of heroine female-led stories and myths and fairy tales that you will have a moment of like a this beastly creature that is has an element of the animalistic side to him that then comes and deceives the heroine, and at some point gives her something that she ingests. He calls that archetype that beat the poison apple, right? And that is an act of it's an attack. It's an attack on the heroine. And so he would look at this story and say that that you shouldn't be looking at Eve as having done something really horrible, that she's actually in a sense a victim in this moment, that she's being attacked by this beastly character who is deceiving her. Basically, she doesn't really know better. So I think that's one way to look at this from a literary perspective. Like you see that in other stories, right?
It's the archetype. Well, it's the archetypical. The definition of this we have
right.
This subtle, as Robert's talking about in the comments, serpent who makes this attack on the heroine in this particular way that becomes the classic archetype of that. The apple. I think that might be coming out in a couple of days, but one of our clips on the poisoned apple archetype. Well, here it is. And of course, it never says apple either. I as a kid, I never thought it was an apple. I just thought it was a magic fruit. It wasn't until much later that I realized that people identified it with an apple. I never did that as a kid because apple is not mentioned.
That's interesting. I wonder if I have a theory. I don't know if this is true, but I wonder if it's because there was a certain point in the English language when apple just meant fruit. Like apple was just the word that we use today to mean fruit. And so there might have been some kind of a moment where there was some point in the history of the translation of Genesis where people were saying apple just to mean fruit. And then people brought that to mean the modern day specific fruit called an apple. I wonder if that would be
interesting.
Yeah,
that would be interesting. Yeah,
that's why we have words like pineapple. Pineapple is a residue of that, of that old word.
Okay.
Yep. It just means pine
that
fruit.
could make sense.
Yep.
That could make sense because I remember as a kid, the first time I encountered the idea that the fruit was an apple, I was like, it's not an apple. Like this is like an apple is just an apple. Like this is some kind of like serious magic piece of fruit right here.
Yeah. I would love to. I love imagining what this thing would look like. I think it's probably glistening a little bit. It's a little multicolored. You could probably look at it and it's really iridescent. I just think it must be really beautiful. Because she looks at it and she's like enchanted by it. It's like it looks, and it's got to be like it's glistening a little bit, and it looks juicy, and like I get a very vivid image in my mind when I try to think about what this fruit looks like. I guess I think of like sort of like an elevated plum is what I have in my head, like a much more like a plum that's like a little bit lighter in color and like more beautiful. I don't know. That's what my imagination gives me, but. Also, plums are great. They are nice and sweet, a little bit tangy, but I bet this would taste even better than a plum. I bet it would be transcendent.
Yes.
Nice and soft.
Right. I mean, that's how it should be depicted in film. That's
just juice drips. Yes. Like it's got to be the thing that you like. If this was in a movie, the kind of thing where a human looks at it and you're just like, oh, I must eat. There are things that aren't really edible that we think, oh, I want to eat that. Like sometimes we look at magma and we're like, I wish I could eat that. It should be designed in that kind of a way. Like it's just pull on like what we see candy. Candy does that to us. We're like, oh, I have to eat. It's colorful. It's bright. So this fruit must have been like that. It had to have been. See if was there anything else I wanted to say about. Are there any other archetypes from the Heroine's Labyrinth framework that apply here that we should be thinking about? That was the only one that I had in mind myself. But
that's the major one.
Yeah.
I bet we can pull up his diagram.
Yeah, let's do that real quick and see if there's anything else that
Where is his spiral? Oh, here it is. Okay. I will share a screen. All right. The masked minotaur.
Which is, you could say that's what the serpent is.
Is that the serpent? Right. It's
Mhm.
not completely perfect because it's not like we're talking about a social apex character. I mean, we could be if you really want to lean into the walking, talking, upright serpent who's like could be whatever. I mean, you could completely lean into that in a completely fantasy way, but we don't really have that quite so much in.
Yeah, and this is not going to have all. It's obviously not going to have all.
Sacred fire, captivity bargain.
I don't know that.
I'd be interested to know what Doug actually says to say about all this.
Yeah.
Call to adventure, cult of deception, chambers of knowledge, chamber guardians.
The idea of knowledge being important, I think is
right.
But
absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, the call to adventure being the call to eat.
Yep. I think you're right.
Well, and we have the idea of a cult of deception being that they were deceived. So that the serpent is implying that they are deceived by being here in this garden, or the reverse, that they are being deceived by the serpent.
Right. And there's multiple levels going on of what is the real deception.
And if you're implying the captivity bargain is being in Eden, then you could have that. I guess it depends on what level of what your interpretation is and how you're stretching what.
Right. There would be a certain level of stretching here. And I guess it kind of is unmasked because
we do have an unmasking idea.
Yeah. God comes and shows and punishes him for it. Home is battleground. Yeah, we're in home. We have not left the garden. So there's definitely some sort of vague similarities.
Yeah, the captivity bargain isn't presented the way that Doug often presents it, because the captivity bargain is something that the heroine voluntarily undergoes in order to maintain some type of status quo in society or something like that. So she's not in Eden by the same type of captivity bargain that would.
But I feel like the strongest things are the masked minotaur, the poison apple, and kind of this cult of deception, chambers of knowledge.
Deception and knowledge. Yeah. That's where
those are thematically important here.
And then kind of an unmasking when God says, "No, you have been deceived. This has been unsolved," and it is in their home, and but they're rejected. It's a tragedy here because they're rejected. They don't receive atonement. It's a rejection of that.
That's a really interesting note. This is a negative Aaron's Labyrinth story.
Yeah. So we don't
really have a
shield maiden. The poison apple wins. We have the unmasking that is something evil. You go to the broken spell in a way, but it's negative.
That's fascinating.
That now your eyes have been uncovered, and now you understand your nakedness and all of that, and all the consequences that are going to fall from that. And then rather than atonement, you go to being cursed.
Yep. And what's really intriguing too, to look at the story, is that we're talking about, about deception. Like, what is actually the deception that's going on here? Because the serpent tells a partial truth. He doesn't completely lie to them, right? Like, let me see if I can pull up his exact words here. Hold on. Yeah, so did God say to you, "You shall not eat from any tree in the garden"? She said, "No, we can eat of any of the fruit of the trees of the garden." But God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden. You shall not touch it, or you will die." And the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So that's a partial truth. Yes, they do die. They don't die right away. They do become, they lose their immortality. Which I think is the right way to think about this. Like, basically, once that happens, they lose their immortality. But it is true that their eyes end up being opened, and they become like God, knowing good and evil. And that's something God didn't tell them. God did not say to them, don't do this, or else you're going to know good and evil. He keeps that information from them. So there is an element of, I don't know if deception is maybe too strong of a word, but certainly kind of a kind of lying by omission. By omission,
Right.
God's not telling them that there is a power that's going to come to them if they take this fruit. He just says, don't do it. Don't do it. He tells them the negative thing. He tells them that you will die. And although he kind of says it, does he say in the day? Wait, let me look back how it's worded.
But exactly how that's worded is going to be one of those translation things.
Right. But anyway, but he says that they die, and they do technically, just not immediately. But they also become wiser, and they know good and evil. And so that's kind of intriguing, because like you could definitely make an argument that the serpent is unveiling is a certain amount of deception, but he's doing it for a nefarious purpose, right? So he's giving a little bit of truth in order to make the untruth. Well, actually, no, yeah, to make the untruth go down, because he does say you won't die. That's a lie. That is a lie. They are going to die.
It's not immediate, but
it's not immediate, but they will die because of that. Yes.
But I remember struggling with this part of the story even as a little kid.
Yeah.
Because there's the idea of Lucifer as the giver of knowledge, and of light as a Promethean figure, in all of this. And I remember talking to my mother as a child, and I was like, think of everything we weren't supposed to know. Because I was science minded, all this stuff that we're supposed, and I was like, so wait a minute, we were supposed to just be walking around in a garden, eating fruit and being happy. But think about everything that we know as a society, especially I was interested in space and rockets and all of that, so if we were Adam and Eve in the garden, we would never have a space shuttle. Maybe.
Although here's another really interesting way to look at the story. This was like, I heard this from, oh God, what's the name of it? I was listening to a lecture from, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's like a liberal arts college, and they have free courses. Hillsdale. I want to reference. Yeah. I think it's Hillsdale College. Yeah, Hillsdale College. So I listened to their lecture about Genesis, and one of the things that he mentioned was that it's possible. Again, this isn't in the text, so we're reading into it here, but it is possible that this commandment God gave them was not meant to be permanent. Like, it might have been that he was testing them to be like, okay, well, are they going to obey me? And then once they were mature enough, because they're basically like children, like, they've just been created, right? And so maybe he was going to wait up until a certain point, once they were ready for the knowledge of good and evil, that he was then going to allow them to do it. It's possible that eventually that knowledge was going to come to them, but they would have been able to have it without the curse. This is a very intriguing line of thought. I was like, well, yeah, I don't know. I don't, it's possible that there's no way to know one way or another if that's,
Yeah, that's not explicitly in there. And I just remember, I don't remember ever receiving a satisfactory answer to that as a child. I mean, I didn't like immediately associate, oh, then it was the serpent who has given us all of these things that I like in the world. I mean, it wasn't that direct, but it was like, I kind of like science, and I kind of like knowing things and doing things. And so what God actually wanted me to do was just kind of walk around in the garden. I do remember, and because I remember talking to Mother about that. I don't remember exactly what her answer was, but it wasn't completely satisfying. But it was so that was definitely a thing. That was an issue. So I guess that was a genesis of an idea in my mind, as the serpent is kind of Promethean figure.
Yeah, Promethean. Yeah. I feel like we're already getting into interpretation. Should we continue in that direction?
Okay, then let's do that.
Because one of the things that bothers me about that story too is that it feels very much, at least reading it straight, right? Reading it plainly, like you can interpret it in ways to get around this, but just reading it plainly, it very much feels like God is setting these characters up to fail. Like they're very childlike. They may be physically adults, but they've been created. They haven't been around for that long. I mean, maybe you can insert like, oh, maybe there's been decades in between. It doesn't say that there has been.
No, I was actually listening to somebody today who said that we can tell by whatever that the apple or whatever the fruit was eaten 9 hours after their creation.
That seems pretty specific.
Yes, there are some people who have some very specific reasons to think it's like, okay.
It definitely feels pretty, like, the way these characters are behaving, feels to me consistent with, they haven't existed that long. They don't necessarily have self-control, right? It's like, oh, he said not to do it, but someone else is like, oh, no, if that's not true, it'll make you really smart and wise. And they're like, it looks so yummy. It makes me think of like a child, like you leave it, those experiences where they leave a kid alone with like a marshmallow, and they're like, if you don't eat the marshmallow and we come back and it's still there, you'll get a second marshmallow. And the kids are just sitting there looking at the marshmallow like, oh God, I know I want to wait for the marshmallow. I can't wait. I feel that way about Eve. She's just like, oh, but it looks so yummy. Like it feels so childlike. And it's like, really, like the whole, like they're going to be cursed and they're going to lose their immortality. And like the whole human race is going to have all of these, negative impacts because these two very childlike, freshly created humans didn't yet have the skills to like, to control themselves basically, and to like, because it's like, why couldn't have God come and been like, all right, kids, what did you do? Like, and then maybe there was some sort of a mild punishment. Instead, it's like, now you're cursed forever. And like, now you're going to eat, you're going to have to work for your, like, oh, but here's the thing, because this is my favorite way to interpret the story. It kind of makes sense metaphorically, right? If we're not looking at this historically, we're not saying like God is supposed to be, we're not looking at it as good guys and bad guys. We just kind of separate it and look at it as archetypes. You very well could see this as a story about going into adulthood. Actually, there are two interpretations. This is one of my favorites. I'm going to present another fun interpretation, but I feel like this is most consistent. Like I think there's most support for this particular interpretation in the text, which is that the Garden of Eden is childhood, right? The Garden of Eden it's innocence. It's, you feel like you're going to live forever. You don't have an awareness of the fact that one day you're going to die. So some kids, this, unless you encounter death at a very young age, this can shift a lot more quickly. But there's a sort of lack of awareness of the consequences of your actions. You don't have a fully developed theory of mind. Everything feels very, whimsical and you're not, you haven't entered puberty yet, so you're not aware of your body as in its nakedness and what that means. All of that is very innocent when you're a kid.
Yeah, when you're a kid, you just like, you take off your clothes and you run down the hall. It doesn't matter. Like,
and it doesn't mean anything to you. You don't have any concept of that, right? And you could look at the moment that the fall happens as not necessarily being, okay, sin enters the world, but I like looking at it as like a shift in human psychology. What happens when you lose that innocence, when you enter puberty and you become aware of the fact that you're naked, right? You become aware of yourself as a sexual being. And you also, with that comes the ability to, have empathy. Well, it's not like you don't have empathy when you're a kid, but like there's a greater level of awareness of yourself that comes as you become an adult. With empathy in particular comes the ability to both be kind to others and to be cruel, right? Empathy creates both of those elements. That's the knowledge of good and evil. Like a snake or a lizard or a bear or any of these are animals. They don't have the ability to be good or to be evil because they don't have the same level of consciousness that we have. But because we have that ability to empathize with other people, we have a different, like, to be a human, there's a different level of self-awareness that we have, and we go through that as we age and become adults in particular. And that, that's why we have as much, we do so many horrible things that sometimes some of the horrible things we do to each other are things that animals do to each other, but we don't think of it as evil, in the same way that we do when humans do it, because there's like this extra element of awareness and intention, where we're not just surviving. Like we know the impact we're having on other people. Like if someone, is doing some sort of medieval form of torture on someone, for example, they can do that evil because of their intelligence because of their awareness of how that what that feels like for the other person, you know. And so that is a really, to me, really thought-provoking way to look at this story, that like with that comes, and also there comes adulthood of, now we have to work for our food. Like the this is what the men are experiencing. The women are experiencing, the pain of childbirth. These are all very adult things. So you could look at it in that way as like a shift into adulthood.
And both of those are, you're right. Both of those are shift into adulthood.
Yep.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, that is my favorite interpretation. There's another interpretation that's very similar, but this is one that I don't feel like is inherent to the text, but it's a fun modern thing to read into the text, and that is if you bring in kind of an evolutionary understanding, right? Of like there was a point in our past where we were like the animals around us, and there came a moment where it wasn't like an exact moment, right? Obviously, like it was a slow evolution, but there came a moment, broadly speaking, where we were not like the other animals, and we gained the knowledge of good and evil. We gained this other level of consciousness that allowed us to do those things, but it came with a cost, right? It came with, there's a curse, which is the fact that we ended up having civilization, maybe not as a result of consciousness, but maybe there's some sort of connection there, right? That maybe as we left, you could say like the Garden of Eden in that case is like, our more animal-like past, our more, a more innocent time where we were kind of connected with nature, we were a part of nature. And then as we enter into, agriculture and civilization and things like that, that's when we end up having the curse of, well, now we have to, get our food from the ground. And with women, with that thing, it's a much more stretch. This is why I don't see this as inherent to the text, but it's still fun to think about, because specifically, this is again, modern understanding, but the reason why childbirth is painful to the human animal is because we are bipedal creatures, and so there's only so much width that the waist can have. Like it can only be so wide. It's different if you're a four-legged creature. Like you can accommodate the birth more without as much pain. It also, because we are as intelligent as we are, we have these really large heads proportionally to our bodies, and evolution has tried, like it being anthropomorphic here, but it's tried as much as it could to make this work. We give birth to babies that are like partially formed, like their skull isn't all the way full. They're very vulnerable. Infants are very vulnerable. Still like a patch there, and that's because it's like trying to make it as possible as we can to let that actually come out through that small area. But it's still a big head, and it's painful. That's
very direct. That it's knowledge that causes that.
Knowledge and bipedal allows us to be tool makers. So now we are conquering, having dominion over the earth, right? And one of the costs of that is that it becomes painful to give birth to children, and that is like. That gives me goosebumps. I think that's so cool, even though I don't think that's what the text means. If I was a Christian, that's how I would interpret it. Like if I was still believing this and I was trying to make it work in my modern worldview, that's how I would interpret the text. Like this is like a representation of like of that, the cost of us becoming what we are, to becoming the knowledge of good and evil, of being conscious, self-aware creatures that have the ability to have dominion over the earth and to make tools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It comes with a cost. Those are some thought-provoking interpretations.
It comes with a cost. It comes with a cost is something that I think I would have really liked or accepted as a child when I was dealing with that issue of what was I not supposed to know. But if it had, and it was never presented to me, into the idea that space travel, the space station and all this stuff that you love so much, that comes at a cost. And this is telling you the story of a cost. That would have been very interesting, but that was never something that was presented to me in that particular way.
Yeah. And I think even if you have it with like the child, like even if you're looking at it like the coming into adulthood, which I feel like is much more substantiated by the text, that has that same feeling. It's comes with a cost. You become mature. There's things you gain, but there's also this darkness. This burden that comes with that knowledge and awareness. So there's a lot of depth to this story, actually.
Yes, I think so. And this may not be moving in a non-depth direction, but it's nonetheless something that you had mentioned earlier that
Yeah.
I think I want to connect back to, because you had said earlier that, okay, when we're talking about the creation of these stories in its historical context, perhaps explaining things about why, trying to give an explanation for why something is the way that it is, like why snakes bite us or something like that.
Yeah.
And we couch that as a historical thing, but actually it occurred to me that that's not how the text is treated today by some, because I was recalling a story where my grandfather, the Southern Baptist preacher, he said that he was he was reading the Bible on a plane, and that there was somebody who was it may not have been blind, but nonetheless was disabled in some way, unable to walk, or I thought it was blind, but how would they know they're reading the Bible? I'm not sure, but nonetheless, and that person asked him, why did God do this to me? According to the story that he told, why did God do this to me? Why is my body not physically perfect, or not able like that? And he said that he went back to the book of Genesis to explain why there was an imperfection. This isn't something that God did to you. This is a consequence of the sin that entered into the world because the serpent tempted Eve. So, and that's one of those ideas that, well, gee, maybe we're not so far removed, the theory of the humanities hypothesis, maybe we're not so far removed from trying to understand why there are things that are wrong in our world through a story like this, because that's clearly what he was doing. I mean, that's my grandfather. That's not a Bronze Age guy. That's my grandfather on an airplane, according to the story. Using this story to explain why
the problem of evil, basically.
Yeah, right. Explaining the problem of evil.
Yeah, that was the version that I heard all the time too, growing up. That basically anything imperfect about the world is because of the fall, right?
It's because of this right here.
We live in a fallen world, and with the implication that one day it's going to be changed and there's going to be a restoration and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a very influential idea. I'll bring up some notes here. Yeah, as maturity growing up, I love those too. Some of that element of consciousness came from I got some of those ideas from Jordan Peterson, because he talks about this story. He was saying the concept comes from self-aware beings, the ability to reflect on our actions and assign meaning or value to them, the ability to choose to act in ways that may go against our primal desires. I don't know if that was my words or his, but yeah. The ideas of right and wrong action in these are my words, a highly complex social unit. Having empathy and understanding, knowledge of others helps us both in doing good and in doing harm. But then I thought I wanted to make a note, just because I'm just, interacting with the internet and with other interpretations of this, because I loved all that he said. But then he makes this really big, political interpretation that's quite a leap that annoyed me, and I just had to make a side note about it. Because he was taking from the story the idea that suffering is inherent to consciousness. These are his words. It's not someone else's fault. It's not because society wasn't organized properly. I wrote, shut up. So I thought that was a kind of annoying thing. It's okay, yes, suffering is inherent to consciousness. I can go through there. There's no need to then say, oh, well, because of that, we shouldn't complain about anything society and try to improve it, which is, again, not his exact words, but what he's strongly implying. He's obviously making a dig at the left, and I'm stop. Stop making it political, but whatever. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think that's, but when we're talking about it as an idea of a reflection of consciousness, that to me is very deep. But then we'll try to make it about modern day politics, that makes it shallow again. So maybe not.
Well, but you did explain this in, or your favorite interpretation, as a rather deep analysis and interpretation of this as something explaining something meaningful to modern society. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
there's several ways to look at this. And I think one reason that's important to read this and to learn is because so much of Western society is based on this. Like you can't interpret some of our greatest art, you know, if you're ignorant of the story of Adam and Eve, you know, and whatever, and all the consequences and things like that. So that's a very important reason to learn that. But you did articulate also, like, but is there anything we're supposed to get out of this? And so you said yes, but your answer to that was very different than my grandfather on the plane. I mean, my grandfather would also have said yes. I mean, here's what this. So we've got. I think the answer is yes. I mean, because I'm very big on the idea of the study of these things from the perspective of its influence on our culture, and that being important. But then also, I do kind of like the idea that, like, okay, what am I actually supposed to get out of this? If I don't believe this literally, which I do not,
yeah,
what am I supposed to? This has been an important story to a lot of people. Am I supposed to actually say, oh, there actually isn't anything you're supposed to get out of this? Like, that also does seem like a stretch.
That feels unsatisfying too.
That seems unsatisfying. That, oh yeah, this is, but in the same way that it's unsatisfying to say that about the Iliad or the Odyssey, you know, or you know, whatever. Like, oh well, this is just a fun story that was created by, you know, somewhere, and we can enjoy it for, and perhaps understand its reference to our culture. But does it actually mean anything to us? Well, maybe it does. Maybe it does. You know.
Yeah. And
I
that
think
allows.
I don't.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No,
I was just going to say, looking at it that way also gets around some of the problems with it. Like, because if you're trying to read it as like this literal thing that happened, like I was saying, like they're like children, and it seems really unfair what God's doing to them here. But maybe that's inherent to it. This is unfair. Like it is just like, you know, God in this case could be seen as like, you know, just the nature of the universe, right? Like this is just the way that it is, that we have these consequences as a result, these, you know, drawbacks as a result of what we are as humans. And yeah, and so you don't, so you, by looking at it that way, you don't have to try to like make it all work morally. But there are other ways to look at it. I have additional interpretations. Actually, why don't I just go ahead and go into one of them? Because what this brings up for me is also like a moral implication too. Like, what is their sin? So if we're you know, kind of taking a step away from the interpretation I just gave, looking at another way of like how did like the original, you know, people reading and writing this story look at it? It could have been what I just described. It could also be kind of an emphasis on disobedience, because I've been seeing that theme come up again and again as I'm reading the Old Testament again. And I didn't really notice it when I read it years ago as a Christian. It's like repeatedly there, like over and over again. God says, you know, one of the most evil things it seems people can do is to disobey him. It's one of the reasons why I don't like, this is, you know, me making my own opinions here, but like, it's one of the reasons why I don't really like the God of the Old Testament that much. He feels like a tyrant to me. I know there's like other people are going to have like sophisticated interpretations of all this stuff, but just there's like this overall pattern in a lot of stories that I see of just like, it's might equals right. You know, it's like, I said to do this, so do it. And yeah, might makes right feels like the kind of this moral precept that I also see in this story potentially. It's another way to look at it. It's like the worst thing you can do is disobey me. I'm God. So it's not about the fruit in this case, right? It's like, you know, here, this is the test of like whether or not you can stay in this garden is, can you obey this very simple command? Apparently it's no. And so now,
the answer was no.
The answer was no. So now you're being kicked out of the garden. Now there's consequences. So that's a very like much less what's what I'm looking for, much less charitable way to look at the God of the Old Testament, kind of way of interpreting it. And I think that's supported by the text too. So both of those seem valid and potentially correct, but yeah,
you know, the Christ brings the sword in the chat here has Well, Bacon says, right, yes. And it would be a really short story. And that was actually part of my thinking as a kid when I was thinking about everything we're not supposed to know. I mean, this has been, according to my interpretation at the time, history has been a long thing, of all the struggle to learn what's real and how to make a spaceship and all of that kind of stuff. And boy, that's been a long story. That's been a long struggle. And yet it was supposed to be a very simple story. The serpent says, please eat this fruit. And like, no, thank you. And then that's it. That's the end. That was the end of all of humanity's story. Like, according to my thinking at the time, at least, and I guess still kind of, maybe somebody has some other interpretation, but if we just stay in the garden, then that's it. Okay. Humanity's story is that the serpents asked us to eat the apple and we said no. And that was correct.
And I was like, good job.
That was all.
We all went home and clapped.
So there is something unsatisfying about that to me. That inherently that has been unsatisfying. And I do want to, Christ brings a sword. So I think this is going to be something that's going to come up a lot if we continue this line of thought, especially with of Christianity's influence on Western civilization or whatever, that Christ brings a sword, says the less you have in this world, the closer you are to God. That's interesting. I mean, because they're
in the garden, I guess. Is that the implication?
Well, I mean, we certainly have traditions in the West where that is true. Monasticism being the most, example. Monasticism or becoming a hermit. Hermitage was one. Then you go into monasticism or whatever. Yes, that is certainly a core component of Christian thought in the West. Not all, because then you get into prosperity doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Later, much later, you got the medieval monks and what, but you end up with prosperity doctrine. And I was interested in the contrast between that line of thought and a pagan line of thought, because I was like, no, when you're talking about Apollo and all of that, if you're the son of God and you're talking about, deifying Caesar, no, man, he's becoming a god, and he is potentially got the highest percentage of wealth on the planet that any human being has ever had, and he's deified as a god, and that's a pagan line of thought. And then a more Christian line of thought is what Christ brings the sword, says that do you see Caesar, who owns almost everything in the world? The pagans deify him. But it's our monk that is closer to God. I know that idea is going to come up later. And then I'm now thinking about that with regard to prosperity doctrine. I'm like, oh, I wonder how that developed and how that tracked.
Oh, yeah, that's very opposite. Yes.
yeah, right. Because the prosperity doctrine appears to come back to the more pagan line of thought on that.
It very much doesn't fit in with mainstream Christian thinking, which is why most Christians, I think, find it annoying. But yeah, it's weird that exists. It really is, because it doesn't really feel consistent. I was gonna say, okay, I feel like because we've been going into why the reading it in the text as Satan feels is not necessarily inherent to the original story, but I wanted to go ahead and talk about that, about how that came about and how it shifted into later Christian interpretations, because I researched it. Okay. So fun enough. So just as a reminder, this one was written. I gotta go look. That was the J source, 10th century BC, right during King Solomon's reign. Long time ago, very long time ago. So at that point in Judaism, there was not the concept of Satan. That concept wasn't even in the religion yet. So it very much was not implied there. There was the idea of an adversary, it wasn't the adversary, but you'd have the word Satan in the original text would be used to describe adversaries, and kind of opponents, whatever. But it was used very broadly. And my understanding is that that idea of having this, almost like a counter to God, because at the time it was just there's God. And there's these other gods, but they're not true gods. They're not as powerful and as special and cool as ours. It was, almost not quite monotheism in the earliest days. But then during the exile, let's see. So during the Second Temple period, when the Jewish people were in Persia, so that's like 500 in the 600 in the 500s BC-ish. During that time, they started to have an influence from Zoroastrianism. And in Zoroastrianism, you have this idea of there's what is it, Angra Mainyu versus Ahura Mazda. I think I'm saying those names correct, but those yeah, it's a very much it's a dualistic religion that has all good comes from this one character, all evil comes from this other character, from another character. So there's like a dual good of evil, and they're having this battle, to see who will win essentially. And so you're trying to like make sure the good wins. That's kind of, I guess, a really oversimplified way to describe Zoroastrianism. So the Jewish religion, Judaism had a influence from Zoroastrianism during that historical time period while the people were literally in Persia. And so there was a sort of this idea of a Satan as a, not necessarily as, they didn't take it to the way the Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrianist. How do you say a person that follows Zoroastrianism? I don't know. They didn't take it to that level because they still wanted to make sure. What was it? Oh, just Zoroastrian. Zoroastrian. Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Because they still wanted to have Yahweh as being, all powerful, all this stuff, and so they didn't say that Satan was as powerful, but they still, that idea of a evil entity out there that's causing bad things to happen started to enter into the religion. So the first example we have of that, of a Jewish text explicitly describing this all evil being, this sort of personification of evil. Like they didn't have a personification of evil. We have that in the 2nd century BC. So that's 2nd century. That's some 400 years after Genesis was written. So there's a gap of time before that idea even existed. We have that in the books of Enoch, Jubilees, and others. And then the kind of the modern Christian interpretation of Adam and Eve that we're familiar with, that comes even later. That comes in about the 2nd century CE. So Christians and Jews both around that time were kind of developing this idea of Satan. Actually, they had the idea of Satan, but that was when they first started to interpret the story of Adam and Eve as the serpent, as serpent being the devil in disguise. So that comes.
You get a reinterpretation.
What's that?
You get a reinterpretation.
A reinterpretation about 800 years later after it was written. So
right.
Big gap of time. Big gap.
Right.
Of time.
And we've had even more from that. I mean, I want you to keep going, but I mean, that is when we talk about, okay, like we did in the very beginning, that, okay, what's the story of Adam and Eve? There's a modern conceptualization of that story that is a blend of what we just talked about, but it's not only a blend of what we talked about. It is also infused with centuries and centuries and centuries of other interpretations.
Right.
So
right.
It's often very difficult to go back, and if you read something, you're like, you are already infused with your other centuries and centuries of understanding.
Yes.
That you may not, that you probably don't even recognize, myself included. I mean, myself included. We're so saturated in everything that has come after. That's one of the arguments why it's very difficult to say, oh yeah, I know exactly what they were thinking, because I'm just saturated with all of the centuries and centuries of other thinking.
Mm-hmm. And part of the context of why this reinterpretation happened, there are two things that are motivating it. One is there's a move to differentiate from paganism, right? Like we are the pagans over here are evil, and all of their gods that they worship, like specifically like Celtic, Greek, Roman ideas of God and religion, all that stuff is bad. And there is this growing association of the devil, of Satan, with especially Pan. So the god Pan, he has horns. That's where we have the modern day idea of a devil with horns that comes from Pan. And Pan was a very sexual god. Like there was an association that he was probably like, well hung, you might say. And that was like the idea of Pan, that he was this like wild, nature god kind of. This was, some of this is like the accusations of from Christians and Jews, this idea that like this is this, wild temptress. It's not temptress, tempter. And so essentially, by saying that the serpent is the devil in disguise, they're saying that like Eve as the primary sinner here, which is again not how people read it centuries before, that she was seduced by the devil, essentially, is kind of the undertone of this interpretation. And then that she seduced Adam. And so there was a very distinctly misogynistic interpretation here. So that's the other thing that's influenced. There's this influence of like, we're trying to separate ourselves from paganism. And also there was a move towards more misogynistic interpretations of the religion, Christianity in particular, because early days of Christianity wasn't really that patriarchal, but it became more so. You get more of the ideas of, no, women need to submit to men, women need to, let men be the primary spiritual leaders, all the stuff that kind of was coming up around that time. And so that's partly why some of us, there's that question of like, is the Adam and Eve story sexist? I would say originally as written, no. I think it's better to look at it from that Heroine's Labyrinth way, that like she was attacked in a very archetypal way that we see in a lot of feminine led stories. But it became that when by making the serpent Satan, and by making it an embodiment of evil, there's this accusation in that Eve was the one that first fell for it, and so it's her fault. She's the primary sinner. She's being attacked because she's a woman, and that because she's a woman, she falls, and she then with her womanly, evil seduction, brings Adam into the fall as well. So that was kind of an association that came later. And anything else to say about that? Yeah. That's how that developed. Yeah. That's all I had on that. Yeah, well, interestingly too, so I guess I'll make one more note, because around that time, the idea of Satan originated in Judaism, and then it was adopted by Christianity because the timing was right. Christianity was kind of being birthed roughly, very loosely around the time that idea was appearing in Judaism, but it didn't stick. It didn't really stick in Judaism. It stuck in Christianity. Like modern day Jews don't really, most Jews today don't really believe in like an embodiment of evil like that. So that's kind of an interesting side note. Yeah. Yep.
I think we're probably going to return to the idea of paganism and what that means in future discussions, because I've been unsatisfied with some of the discussion that has, because in a very important sense, it's what you just talked about, which makes it very broad. Paganism is anything that is not Christianity or Judaism.
In Europe in the first, early days of Christianity.
Right. Especially prior to the arrival of Islam.
Yes, prior to the arrival of Islam. Exactly.
Okay, so if you are in the European, Middle Eastern sphere, North African sphere, and you are not in a certain definition, and you're not Christian or Jewish, then you're pagan. But that means a very large category.
Yeah, that's that's multiple religions.
Right. So like what is it? Yeah. So and that's one of the issues that I have with some of the thinking that we will probably explore later in future conversations with different people, is like, okay, if you're thinking about pagan thought, okay, maybe there are similarities across all of that. That is something, and they're important to talk about. But on the other hand,
have a cultural origin. They have a lot of similar archetypes and stuff, but they are still distinct, right? Like I just mentioned Pan. There's the Celtic equivalent would be Cernunnos. I think I'm saying that right. Is there a Norse equivalent? Probably, but I can't think at the moment. But like, there's a lot of common characters that probably had a single origin. You could make the argument, but a long time ago. We're talking thousands of years ago. But yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, no, that was just it. But just the idea that, okay, if we're thinking about what is pagan thought, I would be fascinated at similarities across all cultures or all religions that are not Christianity or Judaism. And if they exist, then that's an important thing to know. And, but on the other hand, that is such a diverse category. Like, are we really talking about, are we really, even from are we really talking about Germanic tribes?
Yeah.
outside of the Roman Empire, as being the same as Greek. The Greek religion, Zeus and Hera and all of that.
I mean, that's
There are
different. Those people were very diametrically opposed to each other and racist towards each other at the time.
What are they? Yeah. So we'll just see.
Yeah.
We'll see. I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot. So yeah, I don't know exactly how we got onto that, but I've been thinking about that a lot. So but when you brought up the idea of paganism and how do we use that term?
Right. And it was kind of, I guess, in a sense, being all bundled together at that time by Christians, even though it wasn't, because they're just trying to separate themselves from that. We are not this. And all of this is evil, and this is,
and
deception.
That's all. It's othering. That was intentionally othering. Everything else that's not us is othering.
Yes.
But when we think about paganism today, I mean, today you think about like Wicca or something.
And can I do a quick little personal rant, because this is actually something I feel strongly about. the lingering bigotry is still in our modern day culture, like in terms of so many of the archetypes that we have, that what we think about, and I see it all the time in all sorts of like fantasy stories, what we think about as what our go-tos for like evil characters, like we think about witchcraft, for example, like all of those archetypes have their roots in, Christians, especially Middle Ages and beforehand, just basically marginalizing other religions. Like, or even what we have that in modern day America too, with like how we think about voodoo. It's like, oh, scary voodoo. That's literally just like from a few centuries ago of Christians demonizing the original religion of I guess it was enslaved people from, where is that? Oh God, I forget where that originates, but it's a very specific part of Africa of the Vodun religion. There's nothing like in particular like creepy about it. It's literally just a demonization of, oh, they have this other evil religion that's not Christianity. And it's still in our modern day pop culture, we have this view of like, oh, voodoo, or oh, the witches. And it's like it now that I see the origins of a lot of these things, it irritates me so much. And I'm like, except that the origins of like like Celtic religion and stuff like that, which is super influential on modern day Wicca, for example, like there's nothing inherently like it's not that different from any other religion. It's just a religion. It's just spiritual paths, but it's been demonized, and we still use those in a lot of our media as like a default, even by people who don't necessarily think that those things that aren't Christian and that don't have that kind of a framework anymore. Like the impact is still there in our culture, that we go to these old archetypes of othering from centuries and centuries and centuries ago.
I'm not even sure what I'm not even sure how much influence are you talking about, like modern witches. I mean, I'd love to talk to somebody about that on ancient paganism.
Oh, wow, that's a distant connection. But what I mean is specifically like the fact that we, like I would have to think of a good example that I would have to be able to make an actual argument. I'm just ranting right now. But like a lot of let me see if I can think of an example, because I know this. I got angry about this again recently. Well, I watched the movie. It's the one with witches. What's it called? Suspiria. I remember having that thought when I was watching Suspiria. I was like, this just feels like recycled ancient Christian bigotry. that's just in the modern day culture context. Of like, I maybe that's like I often sympathize with the marginalized cultures. Maybe that's why I'm like, why are they bad? But yeah, whatever. Anyway, I'll stop ranting now.
Okay. I mean, I want to say there's been a lot going on over in the chat, and I have not been following it all, but I mean, we're not going to address most of what has been going on over in the chat.
They can have their own conversation over there.
Okay, Wesley, goodbye. Okay, goodbye. You've had your say. Thank you. Goodbye. Christ brings a sword. Okay, well.
Oh no. We have some. Is there some? Oh no. Some evangelism going on over there.
So, all right.
It's not the kind of conversation
we're having. But okay, we're not going to be addressing all that. So, all right. Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we're kind of off the topic of that with
Yeah.
the relations, things like that. But I do want to talk about, like, especially because we want to move into, like, we talked about the Iliad. We'll talk about the Odyssey with you or somebody else, or whatever. And I'm still about to finish up the Aeneid and things like that for. The different influences on our modern thought.
That's the reason why I
been
mentioned that.
very interesting, and also why that it just seems like we have such little information. Because, like I said, in some ways, I'm like, okay, I feel like, okay, we got a real direct kind of arc of history here, but in other ways, it's like, hey, let me reconstruct the Irish pagan religion of 600 BC.
You can't. No.
I mean, like,
yeah. And the sad part, by the way, specifically, some of it is because of this sort of suppression that I'm mentioning. Some of it is like literally like specifically like with Celtic, what's the word I'm looking for? Like Druidry. A lot of that was not written down. Like it was just
and
so a lot of it was
no idea what
lost.
that is.
Yeah, a lot of it was just lost because it was suppressed, and it was marginalized. Like it was considered an evil religion in the Middle Ages, and so people just kind of stopped practicing it. And there are modern day neo pagans that are trying to like bring some of it back, but a lot of it is like we have some clues, and we're gonna fill in the blanks, and we're kind of making our own thing at this point. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's because I would love to know, because we're like, okay, so I really want to know what the Celtic Druid was like.
Yeah,
that's just lost. That's just lost. I wish that we did. Yeah, it is so sad. It is so sad because, like I said, you've got the here's the direct arc of what we got, but then you have all these other cultures that you're like, well, what were they like? What did they think? No idea. Like no idea what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I wish we had more. I wish we did have more information.
Yeah.
Maybe one day we will find it. Was there any other major topic you've got?
I think that was it. Let me look real quickly.
I'm very glad.
I have one more quote. On that on this topic that I'm just going to read. That's
okay.
Funny about the sexist interpretation of this.
Okay, all right.
So this is a quote from something I was reading. Let's see what was the source. I want to make sure I can quote it. This is from a book called On the Apparel of Women. I found it on the worldhistory.org. It was talking about the origin of Satan. I think that's where I got this information. So it says, in the rabbinic treatise Genesis Rabbah, Eve's sexual shame is why women remain veiled, and that menstruation was the punishment for shedding the blood of Adam. Tertullian, a 2nd century CE church father, claimed that through Eve, all women were the devil's gateway, and because of Eve, even the Son of God had to die. Like that's some like real like who hurt you, my man? Like I know you're probably heartbroken over this woman, but you don't have to go be misogynistic towards the rest of them. Like that's like whoa, that's some real like with some pretty intense misogyny. So that's some of that was what was underpinning some of these reinterpretations. So I think that was all I had left. But yeah, it's brutal.
I'm very glad we did this before we did Paradise Lost, because we have almost done Paradise Lost.
Yeah, me too.
So
me too.
But I'm actually really glad because I've been through Paradise Lost several times since we did that, and I'm going to do it again to take some notes and further. But I'm really glad we had this discussion before we do the analysis of Paradise Lost.
Yeah, because now we've analyzed the original story and looked at it
from the source material. Doing that was best,
right?
Yeah.
And now by Paradise Lost, what we're doing is we're basically going to experience one person, like I guess we could say one person's interpretation. There's roots in that and lots of people's interpretations, but it was his take, and so that'll be cool to frame it that way.
Tremendously influential in English literature. This particular interpretation of this. Which is fantastically interesting. Okay, so we did it in the right order. In the end, we did in the right order, because I can't imagine coming back to this after we did Paradise Lost.
I know that wouldn't have been right. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all I got. I have enjoyed this,
Yeah.
and like so, we might have some other people on. I'm experimenting with kind of a different kind of theme or way of approaching the series going forward. That like
Okay.
this doesn't have to be necessarily the only discussion on the first 3 chapters of Genesis. That Doug may listen to this and have something that he wants to add from the Heroine's Labyrinth
Yeah.
perspective, and okay, then we can have another episode with that. And we can just talk to Doug. Better with Bacon. Would I think will have something he would like to say on this. So if there's somebody that comes by who sees this, who would like to have, I mean, we can't. I mean, this isn't an open invitation. I understand there's people who are in our circle who oh wait, I've got a perspective on that or whatever. We can do more than one. And Better with Bacon says looking forward to it. So yeah,
Good.
these are always controversial topics. These religion ones. And I was trying to advertise some of our analysis of religion because I've been because we got the clips and stuff like that, and YouTube won't let me. Won't let me advertise the religious discussions. And some of those are some of our better discussions that we've had. So I don't know, but we will keep going. We're just going to have the conversations that we want to have. And,
Yep.
All right. So I guess is it Brianna, tell everybody where to visit you.
Oh, don't visit me. Leave me
Let me see
alone.
if I can read.
I'm kidding. So I have a newsletter that I send out every month. Excuse me. That's gonna be the best way to keep up with me. And Heath is gonna send the link at any second. But yeah, I basically, so if you want to see what I'm working on from a filmmaking and writing perspective, that is the way. And that also reminds me I need to start working on this month's newsletter soon. So, but yeah, I have a website,
Right there.
which I really need to change because it is at some point soon I'm going to have to update this. But yes, that is me.
Okay, yeah. So that's the main site. Let's see. We got.
I'm starting to hate this website the longer I look at it. This is outdated.
Okay.
This is
Well,
for previous stage in Brianna's life.
Where do I get right to your newsletter?
Oh, gotta go to the little hamburger
subscribe.
menu.
There we go.
Subscribe.
Okay,
Yep.
there we go.
Yep.
All right, I'll put that link down there.
Thank you.
Subscribe.
Mhm.
And I will say that Brianna and I did a web series together, which has been relaunching, which is The Cultists, which is right here, which you need to check out. In fact, I just released a music video called "You Can't Summon Cthulhu with Sour Cream and Onion," and I'm really proud
Very
of it.
ridiculous.
So yes, I consider it a major creative release for The Cultists. So if you are not on that, here we go, The Cultists. I know some of you in the chat will just love this.
It's very goofy.
This show, and then also as one final link if you would like to sign up.
I hope everyone in the chat goes and watches it. Yes.
Please, everyone in the chat, please go and watch The Cultists, and please let us know what you think about that. And
Yes, we look forward to
what
that
your religious
engagement.
opinion on that is.
Yes.
And then
Please
also
comment
come over.
on
We are doing a giveaway right now. Oh, see, Better with Bacon says the music video is great. There we go.
Thank you.
All right.
I know why I said thank you. It's your video.
The Cultist 500. Well, you were instrumental in getting a lot of the footage. $500 dice giveaway. Hey, we would love to have you on the $500 dice giveaway. We're doing an RPG based on the Cultists. It's going to be coming to Kickstarter. I don't have a date on that because we're going to run the Kickstarter when we have enough people. We've had 236 people sign up. Okay, which is fantastic. But we're advertising, getting the word out. And if you're interested in helping us out and supporting the show and everything we're doing, please sign up there. We'll do a $500 dice giveaway on the Morning Grind on the Heath Geekverse channel the day it goes live. But we're going to get more people. And we're going to launch in a big way. So that's what's going on. All right. Thank you so much, Brianna, for being here.
Yes, it was fun.
It's been fantastic talking to you. I really enjoyed this conversation. All right, everybody. I will see you live on the Heath's Geekverse channel tomorrow. We'll be continuing our discussion of Warhammer Quest. We'll see you there at 9:30 a.m. Central Time. Everybody, have a great day. See you later.
See ya.